Chapter 425. For some reason, he always felt that there was something wrong with this old man, but he couldn't tell what exactly was wrong. As for the two masters behind the old man, Yi Fan was well aware of them. His beloved wife, Fujiwara no Chiko, once told him that the master in black armor, with a black saber at his waist and a strong bow and crossbow on his back, was called Miyamoto Akichi. His saber skills were outstanding, and his archery skills were excellent. He once pierced the skull of a huge sea snake with an arrow. The tall samurai with a scar on his face was called Sasaki. This man was extremely strong, and his saber skills were amazing. His thwart kung fu was unparalleled. The huge saber in his hand was said to be the legendary death saber from ancient Japan. This saber was 6 feet long, and it was tempered in the volcano of Mount Fuji by an ancient swordsman with extremely rare black gold. "Don't be so courteous, everyone. Please get up, get up." Seeing everyone salute him, the old man hurriedly said. Only then did everyone straighten up. Matsumoto Takeyoshi introduced Miyamoto Akichi and Sasaki to everyone. Everyone saluted them, and they saluted back. When Matsumoto Takeyoshi introduced Yi Fan to them, Miyamoto Akichi's eyes lit up for a moment. After a series of introductions, everyone sat down again. Kazukin Sato and Matsumoto Takeyoshi sat at the same table, while Yi Fan and the man in white sat on Matsumoto Takeyoshi's left and right sides. 2 ninjas moved 2 tables and placed them beside Yi Fan and the man in white. They also placed a sumptuous meal on the table. The tall Sasaki sat next to the man in white. Miyamoto Akichi, in heavy armor, sat next to Yi Fan. Clap, clap, clap. Matsumoto Takeyoshi clapped his hands 3 times. With a clatter, the cabin door opened, and more than a dozen ninjas entered with trays in their hands. After these ninjas put the trays on the table in front of everyone, they retreated backward and left the cabin. The trays were covered with red silk, and the items covered were either big or small, long or short. The experts lowered their heads and looked at the trays in front of them with smiles on their faces. It was obvious that the tray contained Matsumoto Takeyoshi's reward. Everyone, Matsumoto Takeyoshi, who was sitting in the main seat, said, "Everyone has worked hard in this mission. Matsumoto has prepared a special gift to reward you." Matsumoto Takeyoshi said as he extended his hand to the crowd, indicating that they should open it. After everyone nodded to Matsumoto Takeyoshi, they reached out and pulled off the red silk on the tray. As soon as the red silk was removed, the faces of all the experts were shocked for a moment, and then joy appeared on their faces. The trays were filled with precious and rare items. On Kamehameha's tray was a 1,000-year-old ginseng that had already taken human form. On Bammu Changqing's tray was a half-foot-long 9-dragon dagger, which was obviously an imperial weapon. On Onijiro's tray was a 7-jade rui, shining with jewels. On Akatsuki's tray was a glass hairpin inlaid with gold and inlaid with jade. The trays of the other experts were filled with glossy mushrooms, jadeite, jewelry, and all kinds of other things, each of them peerless treasures. These things were all from the Great Ming Dynasty's imperial palace, and some were even tributes from various states. Now that the Great Ming Emperor was under house arrest, these things were naturally sent to Matsumoto Takeyoshi's hands by Xuanji. Although these people's cultivation was not low, they were still human and naturally would not refuse these rare items. On Yi Fan's tray was a small, exquisite wooden box about 7 inches in size. The opening of the wooden box was sealed with golden paper, and 3 words were written in ancient script: "Bone-changing pill." Yi Fan frowned, reached out, and picked up the wooden box, tore off the golden paper seal, and opened the wooden box. As soon as the wooden box was opened, a faint medicinal fragrance immediately wafted out. Inside the wooden box, a golden pill was reflected in Yi Fan's eyes. Yi Fan gently pinched the pill and put it under his nose to smell it. The fragrance of the pill assailed his nose, and after smelling it, it made him feel refreshed. He had seen this bone-changing pill when he was a teenager. At that time, his uncle, Yi Chun, was still an official in the imperial court. Once, Yi Chun had made a great contribution, and the emperor was very happy and gave Yi-chan one of the 3 bone-changing pills that were offered as tribute. It was said that the refining method of this bone-changing pill was accidentally found in an ancient book by a wandering Taoist. At that time, the Qin emperor advocated the art of alchemy, and every year he recruited a large number of Taoists to refine pills for him, and this bone-changing pill was one of the pills refined at that time. Although this pill could not make a person immortal, if an ordinary person swallowed it, all their diseases would disappear, and their body would become light and healthy, and their life would be prolonged. If an old person swallowed it, their black hair would grow back, and their teeth would be regrown. After Yi-chan obtained this pill, he did not swallow it himself, but gave it as a congratulatory gift to the head of the Yi family, Yi-yan. And Yi-fan had also seen this pill at that time. Matsumoto Takeyoshi knew that Yi-fan was not short of money, and rare treasures were not rare for him. So he gave this bone-changing pill to Yi-fan to express his sincerity. Yi-fan carefully examined the pill, and after confirming that there was no problem, he put the pill in Baihu's mouth. Chapter 4:26. Although this pill was priceless and extremely rare, it was of no use to Yi-fan. Xiao Zhao currently had the body of a fox, so she needed the nourishment of spirit pills. Although this bone-changing pill could not restore her human form, it was still better than nothing. Yi-fan's actions shocked everyone present. Amongst all the precious gifts that Matsumoto Takeyoshi had bestowed upon him, this bone-changing pill was the rarest. However, Yi-fan had directly fed this pill to Baihu. Baihu, who was in Yi-fan's embrace, placed his nose in front of the golden pill and smelled it. Then, he raised his head and looked at Yi-fan. This is not a nidin, it's a pill. Yi-fan mistakenly thought that Baihu felt that this was a nidin, so he opened his mouth to explain. Baihu lowered his head and looked at the golden pellet in Yi-fan's hand, then raised his head to look at Yi-fan. He licked his lips and then shook his head. He knew that the pill in Yi-fan's hand was a good thing, but he wanted to leave it for Yi-fan. Although Yi-fan's current cultivation was heaven-defying, he still did not have the power to break through the divine cauldron's barrier. If Yi-fan were to consume this pill, his strength would definitely increase. If you don't eat it, I'll send you back. Yi-fan saw through Baihu's thoughts and said. This move was indeed useful. After Baihu heard this, he immediately opened his mouth and swallowed the pill in Yi-fan's hand. To it, leaving Yi-fan was even worse than losing a person. Yi-fan smiled brightly when he saw Baihu swallow the bone-changing pill. Everyone was shocked. They had never seen such a scene before. Matsumoto Takeyoshi frowned. He originally wanted to use this bone-changing pill to help Yi-fan recover his black hair, but he never thought that Yi-fan would directly feed this pill to Baihu. Once the pill entered the fox's body, Baihu's body immediately changed. A red light flashed on Baihu's forehead, and a tuft of red fur immediately appeared in between Baihu's eyebrows. Her crystal-like eyes became more lively and clear, and her fur became smoother and smoother. In the blink of an eye, Baihu Xiao Zhao's muscles and bones had been strengthened. This scene made some of the people present jealous. He didn't want to eat such a good thing, but he fed it to such a beast. What a fool. The short green-eyed boy drank tea while feeling indignant. Among everyone, only Yu Hongji understood why Yi-fan did this. She looked at Yi-fan, who was smiling, with a complicated expression. It was indeed a good thing. After seeing the changes in Baihu, Yi-fan was overjoyed. It seemed that he had to find more elixirs to feed Baihu in the future. Yi-fan thought, Matsumoto Takeyoshi is very grateful for everyone's hard work this time. Matsumoto Takeyoshi, who was sitting on the futon, broke the silence. He raised his wine glass, looked around at everyone, and said with a smile, in order to welcome Mr. Yiken, and in order to make more contributions in the future, I propose a toast to everyone. Cheers! After Matsumoto Takeyoshi finished speaking, he drank the wine in his glass in one gulp. The masters raised their wine glasses, and after toasting to Matsumoto Takeyoshi, they also drank it in one gulp. Akitsuki and Miyamoto Akichi were wearing a veil and a grimace mask respectively, so they only toasted from afar and didn't drink. While toasting to Matsumoto Takeyoshi, Miyamoto Akichi kept staring at Yifan beside him. Yifan's five senses were amazing, so he naturally sensed that Miyamoto Akichi was looking at him. He pretended as if nothing had happened, and everything went on as usual. The banquet lasted for a full 2 hours before it ended. When Yifan returned to his ship, it was already late at night. He took Baihu directly to the roof of the cabin, sat on the ground, and looked up at the crescent moon in Yikong. It had been almost half a month since he returned from Eagle Distress Peak. During this time, he meditated cross-legged during the day and went to the roof of the ship to admire the moon at night. Yiming told him that it might be helpful for him to admire the moon more after returning. This sentence had always puzzled Yifan. What did admiring the moon have to do with improving his cultivation? Although he didn't understand the meaning behind those words, he still followed Yiming's instructions and did the same every day. But then again, even if Yiming didn't say so, he would still do it. He liked the moon. In Yikong, the stars were shining and the moonlight was beautiful. The hook-like crescent moon emitted a cold light, pouring over the roof of the ship. Under the moonlight, Baihu, with a touch of vermilion on her forehead, quietly nestled in Yifan's arms, motionless. Just like that, the man and the fox sat there quietly, letting the sea breeze blow past them. Swish! A shadow descended from the sky and landed behind Yifan. "It's so late. Why aren't you resting in the cabin? What are you doing here?" Yifan said without turning his head. He couldn't be more familiar with the person behind him. "Aren't you also awake?" Akatsuki, who was dressed in red, said as she slowly walked to Yifan's side. She squatted down and sat down beside Yifan. "Here, for you." Akatsuki sat down and handed a half-foot-long wooden box to Yifan. "What is this?" Yifan looked down at the wooden box in his hand and asked Akatsuki. "Open it and see," Akatsuki said. Yifan looked at Akatsuki and then opened the wooden box. Inside the wooden box, a half-foot-long Ganoderma lucidum lay quietly. Chapter 427. Ganoderma lucidum? Yifan asked with a frown. "Yes. Where did you get this thing?" Yifan asked Akatsuki. He remembered that Matsumoto Takeyoshi had given Akatsuki a glazed hairpin inlaid with gold and jade, not a Ganoderma lucidum. If he remembered correctly, this Ganoderma lucidum should be something that Matsumoto Takeyoshi had given to Funakoshi Shinichi. "I exchanged this Ganoderma lucidum with Funakoshi Shinichi using the glazed hairpin," Akatsuki said with a smile. "Exchanged?" Yifan frowned when he heard that. "Why did you exchange for this?" "I don't need this thing." "Who said it was for you?" Akatsuki said as she took Baihu from Yifan's arms. "This is for Xiao Zhao." Baihu obediently lay in Akatsuki's arms and licked Akatsuki's hand. Since the last time Akatsuki sacrificed herself to save Baihu, Baihu's attitude towards Akatsuki changed. It became very intimate. It knew who was good to it. Hearing Akatsuki's words, Yifan understood. Akatsuki wanted to use this Ganoderma lucidum to increase Xiao Zhao's spiritual power, so that it could recover its human form as soon as possible. "Thank you," Yifan said to Akatsuki. "Why are you thanking me? I'm not giving it to you," Akatsuki said while playing with Baihu in her arms. "Isn't Funakoshi Shinichi alone? Why would he be willing to exchange this Ganoderma lucidum with you?" Yifan asked Akatsuki. "He wants to place this glazed hairpin in front of his wife's grave." Akatsuki looked up at Yifan and said. Yifan didn't speak. He heard about Funakoshi Shinichi from Onijiro. This Funakoshi Shinichi was also a person who was infatuated with love. Compared to his own experience, it was not bad. At least his wife's 7 souls returned to her body, and there was still a glimmer of hope. But Funakoshi Shinichi's wife had already fallen into eternal sleep. "Yifan-kun." Just as Yifan was sighing, a clear voice came from behind him. "Shua." A shadow appeared on the roof of the ship behind Yifan. This person was wearing a black robe. Was holding a wooden box was. It was none other than Onijiro. "Mr. Guemu?" Yifan, who was sitting on the top of the ship, frowned slightly. He turned his head and looked behind him as he spoke. "Onaguchi-san?" Akatsuki was stunned when she saw Onajiro, then stood up and greeted him. Onajiro was indeed a Japanese mutant expert. His movement was as fast as a ghost. If Yifan didn't speak, she wouldn't have noticed him at all. I didn't expect Miss Yu to be here as well, Onajiro said with a smile. It seems that I came at a bad time. Sorry for my rudeness. After speaking, Onajiro nodded at Akatsuki to express his apology. Onaguchi-san, what are you saying? Akatsuki stood up calmly and returned the greeting. I've finished my business. Onaguchi-san came at the right time. Onajiro smiled and didn't say anything. Xiao Zhao, I'll leave first. I'll come and see you tomorrow, Akatsuki said as she squatted down and placed Baihu on the ground. Baihu rubbed her head against Akatsuki's hand intimately and jogged back to Yifan's side. Onaguchi-san, you guys chat. I'll take my leave. Akatsuki nodded at Onajiro, then turned around. With a tap of her foot, a red shadow instantly soared into the sky and flew toward the warship in the distance. Miss Yu is really considerate. Onajiro smiled as he watched Akatsuki fly away. He came to Yifan's side and sat on the ground. Your concern for your partner is really meticulous. Yifan-kun, you're so lucky. Onajiro said meaningfully and patted Yifan's shoulder with a smile. Yifan smiled and turned to look at Onajiro. What, Onaguchi-san came here so late at night just to make fun of me? Compared to other experts, Yifan trusted Onajiro more. Other than Akatsuki, Onajiro and Bama Changqing were the closest to him. I came here this time to give you something here. Onajiro handed the long box in his hand to Yifan. What is this? Yifan took the box from Onajiro and asked with a frown. Ginseng, 1,000-year-old ginseng. Onajiro said while looking at Baihu in Yifan's arms with a smile. It's for your sister. Baihu, lying in Yifan's arms, looked up at Onajiro after hearing this sentence, and then lay down. Ginseng. Yifan was stunned at first, then shook his head and smiled bitterly. Don't tell me you exchanged it with your jade rui. It's not just my jade rui. Onajiro looked at Yifan and smiled. In order to exchange it for that old man Kamehameha's 1,000-year-old ginseng, not only my jade rui, but also Brother Bamu's 9 dragons dagger. As soon as these words came out, Yifan's heart was shocked. Among the gifts that Matsumoto Takeyoshi gave to the experts, except for the bone-changing pill, the value of the other gifts was about the same. This also reflected Matsumoto Takeyoshi's principle of treating his subordinates fairly. Onajiro's 7 Jade Rui and Bama Changqing's 9 Dragons Dagger. These 2 treasures were obviously used by the emperor. Any one of them was comparable to the 1,000-year-old ginseng in his hand. But Onajiro and Bama Changqing used these 2 things to exchange for this ginseng. You lost this deal, Yifan said calmly, putting aside the wooden box with the ginseng. Chapter 428. Let it be. Anyway, those 2 things are useless to us, Onajiro said with a smile. Where's Mr. Yagi? Yifan asked Onajiro. Why didn't he come with you? It's not like you don't know him. He doesn't visit without permission, Onamuki said with a smile. There's a famous saying in your Central Plains, the friendship between gentlemen is as indifferent as water. He is such a person. I'm the one who's more suited to give gifts. What about you, Mr. Yagi? Yifan looked at Onajiro with a smile. Are you a gentleman or a villain? Me? Onajiro was stunned, then turned his head with a smile and looked at the sea in the distance. I am not a gentleman, but I am not a villain. Yifan smiled and did not speak. How was it? This time you and Miss Yu went out to perform the task. Did it go well? Onajiro asked Yifan. It went well, Yifan replied calmly. No wonder you came back so early, Onajiro said with a smile. What about you? Yifan asked Onajiro. You and Mr. Yagi came back not too late. It should have gone well. Onajiro shook his head. What? Did not go well? Yifan asked. Look, Onajiro said and rolled up the sleeve of his right arm to show Yifan. When Yifan saw this, he immediately frowned. On Onajiro's right arm, there was a palm-sized fresh scar. The scar was dark red and the skin was burnt. It was a shocking sight, as if he had been burned by fire. What happened? Fan frowned and asked Onajiro. I was burned. Onajiro said to Fan while rolling down his sleeve. Burned? Fan asked Onajiro who did it. He knew about Onajiro's cultivation. To be able to hurt him like this, it must be a master of fire. This injury was caused when I went out to perform the task, Onajiro said with a smile. As for who did it, you don't have to ask. I can't say, this is the rule. Fan glanced at Onajiro, then turned his head and did not ask any more questions. Since the other party was unwilling to say, he naturally would not force him. Although his relationship with Onamuki was not bad, Onamuki was still Matsumoto Takayoshi's man. He had to take the king's salary and bear the king's burden. It was understandable. Just as Fan turned his head, Onajiro's voice suddenly sounded in his mind. Someone is eavesdropping on our conversation. This voice in his mind immediately shocked Fan. What shocked him was not Onajiro's cultivation, but Onajiro's words. Someone was actually eavesdropping on their conversation? This was something Fan never expected. With his current cultivation, as long as he wanted, he could clearly hear the sound of breathing from 100 miles away. However, he forgot one thing. He was not the only one with sharp senses. The dozen or so masters on the warship also had this ability. The ship under his feet was less than 300 feet away from the warship. If the dozen or so masters wanted to eavesdrop on them, it would be as easy as turning over their hand. Among the 5 senses, only the sense of hearing could not be detected. Sight, taste, smell, and touch. These 4 senses had to be used in order to be effective. Sight required blinking of the eyes. Taste required the tip of the tongue. Smell required the twitching of the nose. And touch required the touch of the skin. Only the sense of hearing, no movement was required. It was impossible to tell if a person was eavesdropping just by observing. This was also the most difficult part for Fan. He could sense the movements of everyone on the warship, even the slightest breathing. However, he could not tell who was eavesdropping on them. He really wanted to ask Onajiro who was eavesdropping on their conversation, but he had no way to do so. Onajiro's telekinetic communication ability was one way. He could hear Onajiro's words, but Onajiro could not hear him. As for how Onajiro knew that someone was eavesdropping on them, Fan did not find it strange. These dozen or so masters all had their own unique abilities. Onajiro was a famous master with special abilities in Japan. It was normal for him to have such an ability. Although Fan was inexplicably surprised, Fan still maintained a smile on his face. Number 4 could not see any change in his expression. It's Chin Kong Iha. Onajiro's voice rang in Fan's mind again. He's eavesdropping on our conversation. You have to be more careful on this ship in the future. Chin Kong Iha? It was him. Onajiro's words surprised Fan. He did not know Chin Kong Iha. Why would he eavesdrop on him? Could it be Matsumoto Takayoshi's arrangement? Impossible. Fan rejected this hypothesis. If Matsumoto Takayoshi really wanted to spy on him, he could have arranged for him to stay in the warship's cabin. There was no need for him to go through so much trouble to arrange for him to stay on this ship. Matsumoto Takayoshi's motive was not to spy on him. Instead, he was afraid that he would spy on them. Chapter 429. This time, Bama Chanxing and I went to a border town in the desert of Nanjiang. Our mission was to check if there was a divine cauldron there, Onajiro said to Fan with his telekinesis. There, we encountered a fire snake. The injury on my right arm was caused by the fire snake. Fire snake? Fan's heart skipped a beat. No wonder Onajiro was injured. It turned out that they encountered a fire snake. Onajiro's words should be true. The fire snake's nidin in his body was taken from a fire snake in the desert by Sakitu. The two matched each other. The fire snake seems to be guarding something, Onajiro said with his telekinesis. Bama Chongqing used the Earth Escape technique to examine it carefully. It seems to be a huge bronze object. I don't know if it is one of the 9 cauldrons. Onajiro's words made Fan's eyes light up. Divine cauldron. Onajiro and the others found a divine cauldron. I practiced the art of extreming and the fire snake has been practicing for thousands of years. Its flames are fierce and overbearing, and its yang energy is blazing. In addition, it is deep in the desert, so I can't fully use my yin energy. Although Bama Changqing's 5 elements technique is exquisite, he can't resist the overbearing flames of the fire snake. Onajiro continued with his telekinesis. I heard that you are free and can leave here with Miss You at any time without any restrictions. You also have a divine weapon with cold energy. You should be able to defeat the fire snake. I didn't report this to Matsumoto Takeyoshi. I only told him about the fire snake. You can go there and try. Maybe you can get what you want. After Yi Fan heard this, he turned to look at Onajiro. Onajiro also turned to look at Yi Fan. The two looked at each other and smiled. All right, I've delivered the items. I should go back now, Onajiro said with a smile as he stood up. Yi Fan-kun, I'll take my leave now. Thank Mr. Yagi for me when you see him, Yi Fan said to Onajiro with a smile. Next time you two come together and bring wine. Onamuki Lang smiled, and his figure disappeared instantly. After Onajiro left, Yi Fan stopped smiling and looked up at the warship not far away. He then stood up and carried Baihu back into the cabin. From now on, he had to be very careful with every word he said. It was very likely that Shinkong Iha was not the only one monitoring him. As for what Onajiro had just said to him, he didn't find anything suspicious about it. But even so, he still maintained a clear head at all times. The scariest thing in the world was not ghosts, but the human heart. He didn't know why Onajiro had helped him, and he didn't want to know. There was only one thing that gave him a headache: the power of the immortals. Without the power of the immortals, even if he found the 9 cauldrons, he wouldn't be able to break the boundary and obtain the patterns on the 9 cauldrons. The only thing he could do now was find a way to find the specific location of the 9 divine cauldrons. As for the power of the immortals, he could only think about it at length. Yi Fan, who was lying on the floor of the cabin, looked at the ceiling quietly with his hands behind his head. He kept thinking about what Onajiro had said to him. He and Akatsuki had gone to Sisui to check the results of the 1,000 Ghost Formation's search for the cauldrons. Onajiro and Bama Changqing had gone to the border of Nanjiang to confirm the traces of the divine cauldrons. Based on this inference, the missions that the other masters had received should be similar to the 4 of them. They were all related to the 9 cauldrons. From the expressions of the masters after they returned and the rewards given by Matsumoto Takeyoshi, they had more or less obtained some clues about the 9 cauldrons. Thinking of this, Yi Fan frowned. He wanted to ask Matsumoto Takeyoshi directly, but he couldn't do so. If he directly asked Matsumoto Takeyoshi would inevitably be suspicious. If things went wrong, Onajiro and Bama Changqing would be involved. Onajiro was already taking a great risk by leaking the mission to him. No matter what, he could not let Matsumoto Takeyoshi notice this. He had thought it through. Tomorrow, he would immediately set off with Akatsuki and rush to the desert of Nanjiang to search for the cauldrons. He would try to determine in the shortest time possible whether the bronze there was one of the 9 cauldrons. Once it was confirmed, they would return quickly without any delay. Chapter 430. The next morning, high up in the sky, a large group of auspicious clouds was rapidly drifting. Above the clouds, Yi Fan and Akatsuki were flying side by side. Just like last time, Yi Fan set up a spirit chi wall in front of Akatsuki to prevent Akatsuki from getting frostbitten by the cold air in the sky. Wearing a white robe and a red crystal mask, Akatsuki turned her head and asked Yi Fan, "Where are we going?" "Southwest Great Desert." Yi Fan, who was wearing a white jade mask, replied, "The Southwest Desert?" "Yes. Since we're going to the southwest, why are we heading southeast?" Akatsuki asked Yi Fan in confusion. She wasn't wrong. The two of them were currently flying southeast at high speed. "It's precisely because we're going to the southwest that we have to head southeast," Yi Fan said as he turned his head to look at Akatsuki. Hearing Yi Fan's words, the exceptionally intelligent Akatsuki instantly understood the meaning of Yi Fan's words. It was obvious that he was deliberately disrupting Matsumoto Takayoshi's line of sight. On the surface, they were heading southeast, but their true destination was the southwest desert. Needless to say, Yi Fan bringing her to the southwest desert had something to do with the 9 cauldrons. The reason was simple. Aside from the 9 cauldrons, Yi Fan wasn't interested in anything else. It seemed that she would have to lie to Matsumoto Takayoshi again. Akatsuki thought to herself, "Why aren't you asking me why I'm hiding it from Matsumoto Takayoshi?" Yi Fan asked when he saw that Akatsuki was no longer speaking. "You must have your reasons for doing this. If you want to tell me, you'll naturally tell me," Akatsuki replied. Akatsuki's words made Yi Fan's heart skip a beat. He turned his head and looked at Akatsuki. Akatsuki, who was wearing a mask, looked forward, her long hair fluttering in the wind. "You trust me that much?" Yi Fan turned his head and asked. Akatsuki responded. "Why?" Yi Fan continued to ask. "Because you're a good person," Akatsuki said softly. When Yi Fan heard this, he frowned and did not say anything else. After the time it took for an incense stick to burn, the two of them flew out of the East Sea. Above the clouds, Yi Fan saw that they had circled around enough. He immediately chanted the incantation and pushed the clouds aside, heading straight for the southwest Great Desert. Yi Fan kept using the cloud-controlling art to control the auspicious clouds under his feet, and the mountains, rivers, and cities under the auspicious clouds immediately retreated like flickering lights and passing shadows. 2 hours later, a vast expanse of yellow sand entered the sight of the two people from afar. In the blink of an eye, the two of them had crossed thousands of miles and arrived at the southwest of the Great Ming Dynasty. "We are almost there," Yi Fan said to Akatsuki on top of the auspicious clouds. Akatsuki nodded. "There is a small border town not far ahead. Let's find a place to settle down and take a rest," Yi Fan said. "I'll listen to you," Akatsuki replied. Sure enough, it was as Onijiro had said. The two of them continued to fly for less than half an incense stick's worth of time. Then a small border town came into their view. Yi Fan slowed down the speed of the auspicious clouds under his feet. Then he pressed the cloud's head and landed in a deserted place not far from the town. The two of them felt waves of heat as soon as they landed. This place was close to the desert, and it rarely rained all year round. It was either raging winds, yellow sand, or rolling waves of heat. It was unbearably hot, and the environment was extremely harsh. "What a hot place," Akatsuki said as she squinted her eyes and covered her eyes with her hand to block out the scorching sun. She was from Japan, and Japan was surrounded by the sea, and the air was humid. It was the complete opposite of the environment here. Since she was young, it was her first time coming to such a place. "It is indeed too hot here. Let's find a place to settle down first," Yi Fan said as he led Akatsuki to the town in the distance. It was noon, and the scorching sun was mercilessly roasting the yellow sand on the ground. Yi Fan and Akatsuki stepped on the scorching yellow sand and arrived at the entrance of the town. Fire Dragon Town. Through the air that had been distorted by the heat, Akatsuki, who was shielding her eyes with her hand, saw the large wooden sign hanging above the entrance of the town. The edges of the wooden sign were jagged, and it was obvious that it had been there for a long time. The words carved on it were a little blurred due to the constant exposure to the wind and sun. On the wooden sign, there was a huge skull of an unknown animal hanging on it. This skull had a pair of long and straight horns, and it bared its sharp teeth. Its pair of black eyes stared straight at Yi Fan and Akatsuki, who were standing in front of the entrance. "Let's go in." "Okay." The two of them slowly walked into Fire Dragon Town. Whoosh! Just as the two of them stepped through the entrance, a gust of wind swept the yellow sand toward them. Yi Fan narrowed his eyes and instantly released his spiritual energy 3 feet away, setting up a 7-foot-tall spiritual energy wall in front of the two of them. Whoosh! When the gust of wind met the spiritual energy wall, it instantly bypassed the two of them and whistled toward the entrance. In the blink of an eye, everything returned to normal. "What a strange wind," Akatsuki said to Yi Fan. This wind is strange. We have to be careful. Yi Fan whispered to Akatsuki. When the gust of wind blew, he sharply smelled the stench of rotting corpses. Although he didn't know where the wind came from, Yi Fan knew in his heart that this strange wind was definitely not a natural wind. After hearing Yi Fan's words, Akatsuki nodded. The two of them continued to walk inside. Rather than calling this place a small town, it would be better to call it an earthen city. All the buildings inside were built with thick mud bricks, and the entire town seemed to have only one color: yellow. The houses built with yellow mud bricks, the streets filled with yellow sand, and even the jars and jars placed outside were all yellow in color. Yi Fan and Akatsuki remained alert while looking around. The more the two of them walked, the more they felt that something was wrong. From the moment they entered the town until now, they hadn't seen a single person, not even a single living thing. On both sides of the street, all the doors of the houses were tightly shut, and even the restaurants that were supposed to be bustling with noise had closed their doors and hung a sign. If Yi Fan hadn't heard the sound of breathing behind the door, he would have thought that this was a dead town. He stopped in his tracks and turned his head to look at a nearby tavern. Chapter 431. Yi Fan turned around and walked slowly toward the tavern. Akatsuki followed closely behind. Pa! 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 After arriving in front of the tavern, Yi Fan knocked on the door. There was a rustling sound from inside, but no one opened the door for Yi Fan. "Shopkeeper, I'm a merchant passing by. I'm just passing by and would like to ask for a drink." Yi Fan spoke into the tavern. A low sobbing sound came from inside the tavern. It was the voice of a middle-aged woman. Yi Fan frowned and exerted some force on his hand. He was worried that the person inside would be in danger. "Pa!" The tightly shut wooden door opened in response. As the wooden door opened, Yi Fan saw the situation inside. In the corner of the mud hut, a family of three was hugging tightly and looking at him in horror. It was a middle-aged couple and a little girl who looked to be 7 or 8 years old. It was this little girl who had been secretly observing Yi Fan through the crack in the door. When she saw the masked Yi Fan and Akatsuki, the little girl screamed and turned around, throwing herself into the arms of the middle-aged woman. The middle-aged woman's face was full of tears. She hugged the little girl tightly and cried softly. Seeing Yi Fan and Akatsuki standing at the door, the middle-aged man immediately shielded his wife and daughter behind him. He knelt at the door and kowtowed repeatedly. "Great immortals! Great immortals!" The middle-aged man kowtowed heavily to Yi Fan and Akatsuki while crying and begging. "I beg you, let my daughter go. She's only 7 years old. She's still a child." In the blink of an eye, the middle-aged man had kowtowed several times and his forehead was bleeding. Great immortals? Yi Fan and Akatsuki looked at each other, not understanding what was going on. Great immortals, great immortals. The middle-aged man continued kowtowing and said, "If you want to eat, eat me. Let my wife and children go. I beg you, great immortals, I beg you." Father of the child. After hearing the middle-aged man's words, the middle-aged woman and the little girl immediately cried and ran to the man's side. They hugged the man tightly and refused to let go. The three of them cried again. "I'm just asking for water. Who said I'm going to eat you?" Yi Fan frowned and said loudly. Yi Fan was baffled by their cries. The three of them who were hugging and crying were immediately stunned by Yi Fan's words. The three of them stopped crying and looked up at Yi Fan. You too." The middle-aged man looked at Yi Fan and Akatsuki in shock. "You two aren't great immortals? We are humans, not great immortals," Yi Fan said, reaching out with his hand to help the kneeling man up. Akatsuki also came over to help the middle-aged woman and the little girl up. "You two aren't great immortals?" the middle-aged man said in shock. Then you two are. We are merchants passing by. We encountered a sandstorm on the way and got lost," Yi Fan said to the middle-aged man. "We happened to pass by Fire Dragon Town, so we came in to take a rest. We aren't great immortals." Are you really merchants?" The middle-aged woman who was helped up by Akatsuki asked Akatsuki timidly, "Big sister, we really aren't great immortals." Akatsuki comforted the middle-aged woman. "God bless us. God bless us." The middle-aged woman put her hands together and murmured with her head lowered, "It's good that you're not great immortals. It's good that you're not great immortals." The middle-aged man said as he quickly closed the door again. Then he took out a wooden stick and blocked the door from the inside. "Mother of the child, quickly pour water for the guests," the middle-aged man said to the middle-aged woman as he gestured for Yi Fan and Akatsuki to sit down. "Yes, yes," the middle-aged woman replied while wiping her tears. She led the little girl who was still sobbing to the kitchen to pour water. "Brother, what's going on?" After the three of them sat down at a wooden table, Yi Fan asked, "Sir, you don't know. A demon has come to Fire Dragon Town." No, a great immortal has come." The man realized that he had said something wrong and quickly corrected himself. It was obvious that he was very scared. "Great immortal?" Yi Fan and Akatsuki looked at each other and asked, "What great immortal?" "Sigh, it's a long story." The middle-aged man sighed and told Yi Fan and Little Immortal the whole story from beginning to end. Fire Dragon Town was named after the legend that a fire dragon had appeared in this place. Although this town was not big and only had a few hundred families, it was the only way to go to the western region. Every year when spring came, a large number of merchants would gather here to trade. Usually, some merchants would pass by here. They shuttled back and forth between the Great Ming Dynasty and the western region to do business between the two places. Silk, porcelain, antiques, horses, medicine, and everything else. The people in the town made a living by entertaining these merchants. Almost every family had a shop. As the saying goes, although a sparrow is small, it has all the vital organs. Although Fire Dragon Town was not big, there was nothing lacking in sensual pleasures. Restaurants, taverns, inns, brothels, gambling houses, horse ranches, and so on. As long as it was a place to squander and enjoy, it could be said that this place had everything. The owner of the small tavern that Yi Fan was in was surnamed due his wife was a local. The two of them had opened this tavern in Fire Dragon Town for more than 10 years. Although their business could not be compared with those big restaurants, they lived a good life. Chapter 432. Overnight, except for the people, all the cattle, sheep, horses, chickens, ducks, pigs, dogs, and other livestock in the town died tragically. The stomachs and mouths of all the livestock were filled with yellow sand. That night, the men and women in the town, the old and the young, and the merchants passing by, all had the same dream at the same time. In the dream, two people in white robes and white skull masks stepped on the black wind and floated above the town. They told the people in the town that the two of them were the gods of the desert, and the town would be under their jurisdiction from now on. If they wanted to live and work in peace, they had to gather 10 pairs of virgin boys and girls as sacrifices within half a month and do it every year. Otherwise, the dead cattle and sheep would end up like them in the future. From that day on, the town was shrouded in the shadow of death. 10 pairs of virgin boys and girls. This request was simply impossible to satisfy. Whose children were not their own flesh and blood? Who would be willing to offer their own children as sacrifices? The originally bustling border town seemed to have become a ghost town overnight. Every business was closed, and no one dared to stay outside for too long, for fear of being killed by the gods of the desert. The families with virgin boys and girls were even more fearful. Every day, they burned incense and prayed at home, praying that the heavens would protect their flesh and blood so that they could escape this disaster. Now, less than 3 days before the deadline of half a month, the residents of the town were hiding in their houses, not daring to take a step out. The appearance of Yi Fan and Akatsuki made the family of 3 mistakenly think that the two in the dream had come. The two of them were dressed in white robes and wore masks. They looked similar to the two in the dream, which led to the scene just now. "Ha!" After hearing the middle-aged man's words, Akatsuki slammed the table and said angrily, "What gods of the desert? I think they are evil gods." How could they be righteous gods who used virgin boys and girls as sacrifices? Don't talk nonsense. Hearing Akatsuki's disrespectful words, the middle-aged woman put the tea on the table and stopped her. She nervously turned her head to look at the wooden door, then turned back to whisper to Akatsuki, "If the great deities hear this, it will be troublesome." Akatsuki didn't say anything. She turned to look at Yifan. She's right. These two feed on young boys and girls. If they're not demons, they're monsters. They're not righteous gods at all. Yifan said, "We don't know what they are, and we don't want to know," the middle-aged man said with a worried face. "We just want our daughter to be safe." As he spoke, he pulled the little girl in front of him and held her in his arms, stroking the little girl's head lovingly. "Since there are evil gods causing trouble here, why don't you all leave this place?" Yifan asked. "Escape? How are you going to escape?" The middle-aged woman standing at the side wiped away her tears and said, "The horses and camels are all dead. How can we walk out of this desert with just these two legs? Even if there were camels now, I'm afraid no one would dare to step out of this town." The middle-aged man continued the woman's words. "The day after the accident, more than a dozen merchants who live here brought enough dry food and water and went out together. Who would have thought?" Sigh. The middle-aged man shook his head and sighed. "What happened to them?" Akatsuki asked. "They left the town at night. The next morning, their bodies were hung on wooden stakes at the entrance of the town," the middle-aged man said with a frown. "I saw it with my own eyes." "How they die?" Yifan asked. "Like those cows and horses, they were drowned by yellow sand. Their noses, eyes, ears, and mouth were all filled with yellow sand." As the middle-aged man spoke, he leaned his elbows on the table and closed his eyes tightly. His fingers dug into his thick black hair and tore it back and forth with force. It was obvious that the scene at that time was very frightening, and this man was still in a state of great fear. One could imagine that more than a dozen corpses with sand in their 7 orifices were hanging shakily at the entrance of the town. Anyone who saw it would be terrified and have their hair stand on end. "Is there no one in your town who can exorcise evil spirits?" Akatsuki asked. In Japan, every small town like this would more or less have a few exorcists. "Don't mention it," the middle-aged woman said. "There is an old Taoist who has returned to the secular world who knows how to draw talismans in the town. Usually, his exorcism is quite effective. After the accident, he distributed yellow talismans from door to door and asked them to stick them on the door to ensure their safety. But in the end what?" Akatsuki asked. "A strange wind blew that night. The next morning, the yellow talismans that were pasted on the door of every house were all stained with human blood." The middle-aged woman's voice was trembling. She still had lingering fear when she recalled the bloody scene. "Human blood?" Yifan asked with a frown. Chapter 433. Yifan frowned after hearing that. From what the couple said, these two evil beings did not seem to be easy to deal with. "How many more days until the deadline?" Yifan asked. "Including today, there are 3 more days," the middle-aged woman replied. Yifan nodded. "Sigh, now that you've entered Flaming Dragon Town, I'm afraid it won't be that easy to get out," the middle-aged man sighed and said. "Mr. Du, can I stay here?" Yifan looked up and asked the middle-aged man. Stay here." The middle-aged man's words were filled with surprise. There were hundreds of merchants trapped in Fiery Dragon Town. However, these merchants would rather live in the shabby and dirty stables than live in their homes. The reason was simple. They had a little girl in their house. Who knew if the 2 desert gods, who came and went without a trace, would also eat them as dishes when they devoured the boys and girls. Therefore, when Yifan said that he wanted to stay here, the middle-aged man was a little surprised. "I'll stay here. I'll pay you for the room," Yifan said as he took out a few gold leaves and placed them on the table. There are empty rooms in town. The conditions are much better than mine. If you two want to stay, I can take you there," the middle-aged man said. He saw that Yifan and Akatsuki were both wearing white robes and masks, so he thought they were a couple. Akatsuki blushed and did not say anything. "We won't stay anywhere else. Can we stay here?" Yi Fan asked the middle-aged man. Of course, of course. The middle-aged man was slightly surprised when he heard that Yi Fan insisted on staying here. The reason why he was happy was not because of Yi Fan's gold leaves, but because of the aura that Yi Fan emitted and the battle sword that Akatsuki carried on her back. From the beginning to the end, the man wearing the white jade mask had always been calm and steady. Even when he knew that there was a monster here, he was still calm and unhurried. He was used to seeing all kinds of foreigners in this small town, so naturally, he was very knowledgeable. There is only one kind of person who could do this, and that was a person with a unique skill. The red saber on Akatsuki's back confirmed his speculation. He had seen the robes that the two of them were wearing before. They were Japanese clothing. This should be a Japanese couple, and this should be a couple with great skills. With the two of them around, he more or less felt a sense of security. I'm sorry for my rudeness. After talking so much, I still don't know your names? The middle-aged man asked. My name is Ishihara Taro. Her name is Miyako. We are Japanese. Yi Fan randomly made up two names. Ishihara Taro and Miyagi Akutsuki were indeed Japanese. The middle-aged man thought to himself, Mr. Ishihara, Miss Akaba, please rest first. We'll clear out the bedroom for you. As the middle-aged man spoke, he turned around and prepared to leave with his wife and daughter. Their bedroom was only a wall away from the tavern filled with tables. From the way they were dressed, it was obvious that they were important guests. Since they had taken the initiative to stay here, the middle-aged man wanted to clear out his room for them to stay. Since they did not despise him, all the more he could not neglect them. Wait a minute. Yi Fan called out to the middle-aged couple. The middle-aged couple turned around. There's no need to trouble yourself. We can stay here. Yi Fan reached out and patted the table. Stay here. The couple looked at each other. Won't we make a bed if we put the tables here together? Yi Fan said. How? How can we do that? The middle-aged man hurriedly said. That's too rude. I'm not used to sleeping on the Great Ming Dynasty's heatable brick beds, Yi Fan said out of the blue. This sentence rendered the middle-aged couple speechless. Under the crystal mask, Akatsuki pursed her lips and smiled. This Yi Fan was really good at pretending to be a Japanese. Then I'll have to trouble you too, the middle-aged man said embarrassedly. All right, I have something to ask you, Yi Fan said and changed the topic. Did two Japanese come here a few days ago? A few days ago? The middle-aged man frowned and asked. About half a month ago, Yi Fan added. Yes, the middle-aged woman said. Before the incident, it seems like two Japanese came here. Oh, Yi Fan continued to ask. What do they look like? Were they men or women? They were two men. They looked fair and clean, the middle-aged woman recalled. One was wearing a black robe, and the other was wearing a white shirt. The one in white carried a sword on his back. Chapter 434. Where did they go after that? Do you know? Yi Fan asked. They lived in the town for a few days. Later, I heard that they went to the desert. After that, they disappeared. I don't know if they are dead or alive. The middle-aged woman continued. Akatsuki frowned. If she guessed correctly, the two people must be Onijiro and Bamu Chongqing. She knew that the two of them carried out a mission together. The reason was very simple. The two of them returned to the warship together. At that time, they were wearing exactly the same clothes as the woman said. It seemed that Onijiro had already told Yi Fan about the mission he carried out. Otherwise, Yi Fan wouldn't know so much about it. As Yu Hongji thought of this, she raised her head and looked at Yi Fan. Why did they go to the desert? Yi Fan then asked the middle-aged woman. They went to the desert in the middle of the night. What else could they do besides treasure hunting? The middle-aged woman said. Treasure hunting? Yi Fan's eyes suddenly lit up when he heard these two words. What treasure hunting? I heard that there's a golden bull buried in the desert. Every time it thunders and rains, it will run out. The middle-aged woman said solemnly. It is said that whoever finds this golden bull can be the emperor. Yi Fan's heart moved when he heard this. The person who obtained the 9 cauldrons would obtain the world. This was exactly the same as what the woman said about finding the golden bull and becoming the emperor. Golden bull? Will it come out when it rains? Akatsuki asked with a frown. It was the first time she heard of such a thing. It is the golden bull. The middle-aged woman said solemnly, as long as there is thunder, you can hear the sound of the golden bull. The whole town can hear it. Is it so magical? Akatsuki seemed to be in disbelief. I don't know if it is the golden bull, the middle-aged man said, but when it rains, you can hear the sound of the bull coming from the desert. Are there many people who come here to look for treasure? Yi Fan continued to ask. Of course, there are many, the middle-aged man said. Every year when winter comes, a large number of people will come here to look for the golden bull. It has been many years. Who are they? Yi Fan frowned after listening. From the middle-aged man's words, Matsumoto Takeyoshi was not the only one looking for the 9 cauldrons. Things were far more complicated than he imagined. There are all kinds of people, the middle-aged man said, Central Plains, Fusang, Western region people, and even Europeans. When it rains and thunders, which direction does the cow cry come from? Yi Fan asked. It's in the southwest direction. The middle-aged woman continued. Those treasure hunters are all heading in that direction. Did they find the golden bull? Yu Hongji asked. How could it be that easy? The middle-aged woman said to Akatsuki, the golden bull is very spiritual. Ordinary people can't see it at all. There are ghosts and monsters in the desert, and there's quicksand everywhere. Every time those treasure hunters come back, there are fewer people. There are ghosts in the desert? Akatsuki asked in surprise. Look at what you are saying, the middle-aged woman said. Since ancient times, countless people have died in the desert. Naturally, there will be ghosts and monsters. What is the skull hanging at the gate of the town? Why haven't I seen it before? Yi Fan asked the two. You mean that thing? The middle-aged man explained to Yi Fan. It was brought back by a businessman who went to Europe for business. I heard that it is the skull of a European fire dragon. Skull of a fire dragon? Akatsuki asked doubtfully. Is it the skull of a dragon? That's not it, the middle-aged man said. I heard from that businessman that the dragons in Europe are completely different from the dragons in our Great Ming Dynasty. The dragons in Europe have wings, eat ashes as food, and breathe fire everywhere. The skull hanging at the gate of the town is the head of this thing. This town is called Fire Dragon Town, and it matches the name of this thing. So, everyone gather money to buy the skull and hang it at the gate of the town for good luck. Prepare some water and dry food for us now. We're going out for a while. We will come back before dark, Yi Fan said to the middle-aged couple. Go out? The middle-aged man was surprised. Now, others couldn't wait to hide, but these two actually wanted to go out. The husband and wife couldn't understand. Don't worry, we will come before dark. The smart Akatsuki guessed Yi Fan's idea. He wanted to go to the desert now. Then, okay, seeing that they had made up their minds, the middle-aged man could only agree. The husband and wife wrapped 5 pounds of cooked beef in oil paper and filled a Mongolian leather water bag with water. After everything was done, they handed these things to Akatsuki. Buzz? At this moment, Yi Fan, who was sitting on the chair, stretched out one of his hands and bent his fingers into a claw. A 5-colored ball of light instantly floated above his palm. The ball of light was 1 foot in size and was completely white. It was red, purple, white, gold, and green. The 5 colors intertwined and rotated above Yi Fan's palm. Whoosh! Yi Fan's 5 fingers suddenly straightened, and the 5-colored ball of light floating above his palm instantly spread out. Whoosh! The whole room was instantly covered with a layer of white light, and then it slowly disappeared. The scene in front of them stunned the middle-aged couple. They didn't know what the young man in the white jade mask in front of them had just done. However, I didn't doubt one thing, and that was that this young couple was definitely not ordinary. Chapter 435. Yes. The husband and wife nodded like chickens pecking at rice. Yi Fan's move had caused the husband and wife to be unable to recover from their shock. Let's go, Yi Fan said as he stood up, took the water skin from Akatsuki's hand, carried it on his back, and walked out the door. Akatsuki followed closely behind and closed the door behind her. When the two arrived outside the door, Yi Fan recited the mantra and waved his sleeves. Whoosh! Clouds appeared under the two's feet, and they soared into the sky. This scene made the middle-aged couple, who were watching through the window, so shocked that their jaws almost dropped to the ground. The two's eyes were wide open, and their mouths were wide open. They slowly turned to look at each other, unable to say a word. After a long time, the middle-aged man said in a daze, "The child's mother." "Hmm?" The middle-aged woman responded mechanically. "I'm not dreaming, right?" "I don't think so." High up in the sky, a large group of auspicious clouds flew toward the southwest at lightning speed. Above the clouds, Yi Fan used the cloud controlling technique and constantly urged the auspicious clouds under his feet. As soon as they were high up in the sky, the cold wind blew, and the sultry heat from before was swept away. "You must be thirsty," Yi Fan said as he handed the water skin to Akatsuki. "Drink some water first." Since leaving the East Sea, the two had not touched a single drop of water. "Okay." Akatsuki took the water skin from Yi Fan, opened the cork, and drank a few mouthfuls of water. "That golden bowl, what do you think?" Akatsuki asked as she handed the water skin to Yi Fan. "That's not a golden bowl at all," Yi Fan said as he raised his head and drank a few mouthfuls of water. "Not a golden bowl?" Akatsuki asked in confusion. "Then what is it? If I'm not wrong, that should be a divine cauldron," Yi Fan said as he put the water skin back on his back. "How do you know that it's a divine cauldron?" Akatsuki asked with a frown. "A bull's cry." "A bull's cry?" "Yes." "What does the sound of a cow have to do with a divine cauldron?" The more Akatsuki listened, the more confused he became. "Don't you think it's strange that there's a cow's cry when there's thunder?" Yi Fan said as he turned to look at Akatsuki. "What do you mean? That sound is not the cry of a cow at all, but the sound of a divine cauldron," Yi Fan said as he turned his head. "Divine cauldron?" Akatsuki was even more confused. "The divine cauldron can make a cow's cry. The divine cauldron's body is huge and its stomach is hollow. If the lightning were to explode in the air above it, the divine cauldron would definitely release an echo. That's the reason for the so-called cow's cry," Yi Fan said. As soon as Yi Fan said this, Akatsuki was instantly enlightened. Yi Fan was right. Even a huge, hollow metal artifact could gather sound. The reason why the bronze bell hanging in the temple could produce a deep and long echo was because it was hollow. A divine cauldron with a hollow interior weighed at least tens of thousands of kilograms. In addition to the deafening thunder, it was normal for it to be able to produce a loud rumbling sound. What a brilliant mind. Akatsuki sighed in his heart. "Why are you so sure that this thing is one of the 9 cauldrons?" Akatsuki continued to ask, "Can it be a big bell? Have you forgotten what that couple said?" Yi Fan explained, "Whoever obtains the golden bowl will be able to become the emperor. If it's not a divine cauldron, then what is it?" Akatsuki was completely convinced this time. It seemed like what Yi Fan said was true. There was indeed a divine cauldron here. The 2 Japanese that the couple mentioned just now, Onijiro and Bama Chongqing. Yi Fan said, "It's really them." Akatsuki muttered to himself. "Onijiro already told me their mission last night." Yi Fan said, "They came here on Matsumoto Takayoshi's orders to search for the cauldron. They didn't expect to encounter trouble in the desert." "Why are you telling me this?" Akatsuki turned to look at Yi Fan. "Aren't you afraid that I'll report this to Matsumoto Takayoshi? If you wanted to report it, you would have done so last time. You wouldn't have waited until now." Yi Fan looked ahead and said, "You trust me, and I trust you." Akatsuki's heart skipped a beat, but she did not reply. "It's not that I don't want to tell you some things, but I can't tell you." Yi Fan then said to Akatsuki, "It won't do you any good if you know too much." "Okay." Akatsuki, who was under the crystal mask, pursed her lips and replied softly. To her, she was already satisfied to be able to gain Yi Fan's trust. Under Yi Fan's continuous urging, the two of them flew more than 500 kilometers away from Fire Dragon Town in less than 30 minutes. Below them, the golden desert stretched out as far as the eye could see. It rose and fell, and there were layers upon layers. It was extremely magnificent. "This place is far enough from Fire Dragon Town. Let's go down and take a look." Yi Fan looked at the endless sea of sand below and said, Okay. Akatsuki nodded and replied. Chapter 436. When the two people's feet landed on the soft yellow sand, the terrifying heat wave once again surrounded the two people. The scorching sun above their heads was scorching hot. The yellow sand below their feet was boiling hot. At this time, the desert was like a fiery hell. Yifan's spiritual energy was deep, and he also had the snake shadow sword with him. Therefore, the unbearably hot environment did not make him feel uncomfortable. Yu Hongji, on the other hand, was not as relaxed. Although her Zhenqi cultivation was not shallow, it was completely useless against the temperature of the outside world. In addition, her skin was delicate, and she was not acclimatized to the environment. She was also wearing a long robe, and her face was covered with a veil. Therefore, in less than a cup of tea's time after landing, a layer of fine sweat appeared on her white forehead. But even so, with her tenacious character, she did not complain. "Are you okay?" Yifan saw that Akatsuki was sweating and asked. "I'm fine," Akatsuki replied. She used her hand to cover her eyes and did her best to block the poisonous sunlight from above. Yifan saw that Akatsuki could not stand the heat of the desert. He immediately took out the water bag and pulled out the cork. After pulling out the cork, Yifan activated the spiritual energy in his body and pointed at the water bag with one hand. With the sound of flowing water, a stream of clear water flowed out from the Mongolian leather water bag in Yifan's hand. It directly gathered 1 foot above Akatsuki's head and formed a 3-foot circular water curtain. The water curtain was clear and transparent. It was a thin layer with clear ripples. Akatsuki was shocked. She did not expect that Yifan's spiritual energy control had reached such a level. Shua! Yifan's hand gesture changed, and he pointed at the water curtain floating above Akatsuki's head. Shua! A pure white and slender light shot out from Yifan's sword finger and directly shot at the water curtain. Crack, 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 with a crisp sound. The clear water curtain that was still gurgling a moment ago was instantly frozen, turning into a pure white ice umbrella. The ice umbrella was 3 feet in size, sparkling and translucent. Cold smoke rose in spirals as it poured down in torrents. As soon as the ice umbrella appeared, Akatsuki, who was originally feeling unbearably hot, instantly felt a cooling sensation. The heat from before was swept away in an instant, and her entire being instantly felt refreshed. "You don't have to waste your spiritual energy for me anymore," Akatsuki whispered to Yifan under the mask. Although she said so, she was very happy in her heart. Ever since she started carrying out missions with Yifan, this man had never let her suffer a single bit. Akatsuki saw this and kept it in mind. "It doesn't matter," Yifan said as he put the cork back into the water bag and put it on his shoulder. "The environment here is really bad. If I don't help you relieve the heat, you'll get sick." Akatsuki blushed. Yifan's concern for her made her heart flutter. "How are you now? Are you feeling better?" Yifan asked. "Yes, I'm much better," Akatsuki replied. "That's good," Yifan said. "The cold air on your snake shadow sword is really strong," Akatsuki said. All the experts on the warship knew that Yifan had 2 peerless weapons in his hands. One was filled with raging flames, and its firepower was tyrannical. It was called Parting Fire. The other was filled with cold air, and it was called Snake Shadow Sword. The cold air that Yifan released just now was the result of Yifan activating the Snake Shadow Sword at his waist. Akatsuki did not even need to guess. But Akatsuki guessed wrong this time. The move that Yifan used just now was not the cold air on the Snake Shadow Sword. It was the cold air that came from activating the 1,000-year ice snake's ice core. The ice core technique that Shui Ziwen taught him was very mysterious. Without using any spiritual energy, he could directly extract energy from the ice core. Yifan did not explain too much about Akatsuki's praise. He activated the spiritual energy in his body and lifted himself and Akatsuki a foot off the ground. This way, it was convenient for them to travel. They could observe the desert closely for clues, and they could also leave the hot sand under their feet. It could be said that it was killing two birds with one stone. Whoosh! Yi Fan activated his movement technique and used his spiritual energy to lift Akatsuki a foot off the ground. They began to slowly fly in the vast desert. Although Yi Fan's eyesight was amazing and could clearly see the desert below him from above the clouds, the current situation was similar to the situation at the bottom of the Sisui River. It was impossible to fully sense the divine cauldron enchantment hidden in the desert with just his eyesight. If he wanted to find the exact location of the divine cauldron, he had to carefully observe it from a close distance. The cloud-treading technique that Shui Zuan had passed on to him was the most suitable for him to fly freely in the air without expending any spirit power. However, the cloud-treading technique was not as good as the spirit chi flight technique when it came to flying a foot above the ground. As long as there were strange techniques in the world, there were pros and cons. The clouds were clear and light, while the thick earth was heavy and turbid. The two were polar opposites. The clouds condensed by the cloud riding technique could move freely in the sky without any effort. However, if it was mixed with the Earth's air, it would become turbid and lose its ability to lift. It would not take long for the clouds to dissipate. On the other hand, although flying with spiritual energy would consume the spiritual energy in the body, it could move freely in any space and any place without any environmental restrictions. Chapter 437. Why are we looking for the cauldron here? Akatsuki asked Yi Fan, could it be that you know that the divine cauldron is nearby? In her opinion, the yellow desert here was the same everywhere. She did not understand why Yi Fan would choose to land here. This place is more than 500 miles away from Fire Dragon Town. We're now in the hinterland of the desert, Yi Fan said as he flew slowly while looking around. We'll look for clues on the way back. We'll be able to return to Fire Dragon Town before dark. Searching for the soul return immortal grass in the extreme north gave Yi Fan a rich search experience. He decided to divide the entire desert into 8 regions according to the 5 elements and 8 trigrams. With the center of the desert, he would search region by region. Onijiro and the others didn't find the divine cauldron. Akatsuki asked Yi Fan. They found traces of the divine cauldron, but they couldn't tell me its exact location. Yi Fan replied. Why? Akatsuki asked. It's true that they found traces of the divine cauldron, but they couldn't make any marks. Yi Fan explained, this place is 1,000 miles of yellow sand, and the wind is raging. The vast desert is surrounded by a sea of sand, and it changes every day. Even if you dig a huge sand pit that is more than 100 feet deep, it will disappear without a trace in a few hours. Although the divine cauldron weighs tens of thousands of kilograms, it is nothing to the quicksand here. Even if the two of them had a way to remember the exact location, it would not take long for the divine cauldron to be brought somewhere else by the quicksand. Furthermore, they encountered the fire snake at that time. They were lucky to be able to escape unscathed. How could they have the mood to think about anything else? Fire snake? Akatsuki said in surprise. This fire snake is a kind of spiritual creature in the desert. It has a huge body and spits fire from its mouth. From the injuries that Onijiro suffered, the fire snake that injured him has at least 1,000 years of cultivation. Yi Fan said, Onijiro is injured? Akatsuki seemed to be in disbelief. Amongst the 13 experts, Onijiro's strength could definitely be ranked in the top 3. Akatsuki did not expect that even he was not a match for the fire snake. Although Onijiro's cultivation is exquisite, he walks the path of refinement. Yi Fan explained to Akatsuki, and that fire snake has cultivated for 1,000 years, with its blazing yang qi, and its flames are fierce flames. It is the nemesis of Onijiro's energy. In addition to the hot environment here, the environment for Onijiro is not Onijiro, for his injuries for 1,000 years. If that's the case, they didn't report the discovery of the divine cauldron to Matsumoto Takeyoshi, Yuki Hongji said. He only reported about the fire serpent and did not mention anything else, Yi Fan said. Yu Hongji frowned and didn't say anything. The 13 experts were not as monolithic as they seemed. In addition to her, Onajiro and Bama Chanqing were also secretly helping Yi Fan. As for why the two of them were helping Yi Fan, Akatsuki did not know. But no matter what, it was always a good thing that someone was helping Yi Fan. Akatsuki thought to herself. The two of them continued to fly. In the blink of an eye, 2 hours had passed. Aside from some desert animals and bones, the two of them did not find any clues. The desert was still desolate and yellow. During this time, Baihu, who had been hiding in Yi Fan's hat, could not stand the stuffy heat inside and poked her head out. When she saw the ice umbrella floating a foot above Akatsuki's head, she jumped into Akatsuki's arms without saying a word. Compared to Yi Fan's hat, Akatsuki's was obviously much cooler. Just as the two of them were looking into the distance, patiently looking for clues about the divine cauldron, a white area in the distance entered Yi Fan's eyes. Yi Fan frowned and suddenly sped up, rushing towards the white area in the distance. What's wrong? Akatsuki saw Yi Fan suddenly speed up and immediately asked warily. Her eyesight was far inferior to Yi Fan's, so naturally she did not see the scene in the distance. You'll know when we get there, Yi Fan said as he sped up again. Whoosh! With Yi Fan's astonishing speed, the yellow sand under their feet was stirred up by the airflow, creating a 1-foot-wide sand ditch. In the time it took to brew a cup of tea, the two of them arrived in front of the white area. Under Akatsuki's shocked gaze, Yi Fan's figure slowly landed on the desert. White bones all over the ground. Hundreds of eerie white bones were scattered all over the desert in front of the two of them. Under the scorching sun, they emitted a pale, white glow. This place. The miserable scene in front of her made Akatsuki speechless. Although her cultivation was not low, but this was the first time she had seen such a miserable scene. Woo! When Baihu, who had been lying quietly in her arms, saw this scene, it immediately sobbed in fright and plunged into her arms. It was frightened by this scene. Yi Fan slowly walked in front of one of the white bones, bent down, and carefully examined it. With one look, Yi Fan's brows furrowed, and an unknown anger rose. The white bones under his feet were more than a foot tall, and the skull was only the size of a fist. This was clearly the skeleton of a child of a few years old. Crack, crack, bang. Yi Fan clenched his hands, and his knuckles cracked. He did not even let a child go. He was worse than a beast. Chapter 438. Among the skeletons, there were men and women, old and young. In addition, there were also the skeletons of more than 10 camels. It was obvious that this was a camel caravan of more than 100 people that had been killed while passing through the desert. Yi Fan examined these skeletons and did not find the cause of death. However, he was certain that these people had died not long ago, and the murderer was definitely not a human. There were 2 reasons why Yi Fan said this. First, these skeletons were pure white and had not yet withered. Moreover, they had not been buried by the yellow sand. From this, he could tell that these people had died not long ago. Second, if the murderer was a human, there should still be fur on these dead camels, and they would not be so clean. The people who had just died did not have any flesh on them. It was obvious that the murderer was definitely not a human. Looking at the white bones under his feet, Yi Fan activated the spiritual power in his body and raised one hand. Crash! Hundreds of skeletons were instantly lifted off the ground by 1 foot under the influence of Yi Fan's spiritual power. They were neatly arranged in several rows. Yi Fan flipped his palm and gently lowered it. Hundreds of skeletons slowly fell to the ground with Yi Fan's gesture. Yi Fan slowly walked back to Akatsuki's side. He turned around and quietly looked at the white bones a few feet away. After a long time, Yi Fan waved his long sleeve at the desert in the distance. Bang! 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 Following Yi Fan's wave, 3 thick pillars of yellow sand instantly rose from the sandy ground 100 feet away. Whoosh! The 3 pillars of sand, which were more than 100 feet tall, spun endlessly like 3 golden dragons. Whoosh! After the 3 pillars of sand rushed into the air, they instantly changed direction and dived down towards the skeletons on the ground. Whoosh! The 3 pillars of sand gathered together and completely buried the hundreds of skeletons on the ground. In the blink of an eye, a huge sand pile the size of a small hill appeared in front of the 2 of them. The dead were important. Yifan could not bear to see these innocent people's corpses exposed in the desert, so he buried them. Hiss! Just as Yifan's chest was filled with anger, a hissing sound came from afar. After hearing this cry, Baihu, who was buried in Akatsuki's arms, first raised her head, then quickly jumped out of Akatsuki's arms and directly onto Yifan's shoulder. In an instant, she burrowed into Yifan's hat. It was obvious that Baihu had sensed the strength of her opponent. Right now, it only felt safe when it was next to Yifan. It was the fire snake. Yifan clenched his fists when he heard the screech. He finally understood how those people had died. The murderer was none other than Fire Snake. The corpse's flesh and the camel's fur were instantly burned to ashes by the fire snake's flames. Only fire could burn these things to ashes. It came at the right time. When Yifan thought of the hundreds of innocent people who had died tragically and were buried under the sand dune, he was instantly enraged. "Today I must kill you, you bastard." When the furious Yifan thought of this, he immediately used his peerless movement skill. With a flash of his shadow, he disappeared. Whoosh! Yifan's figure instantly appeared in midair. He stepped on the void and floated in the air. His cold eyes stared at the sea of sand not far from his feet. Swoosh! Above the sea of sand dozens of meters away, a huge swollen sand belt quickly swam into the distance. "Want to run?" "Not so easy." Whoosh! Yifan's figure disappeared again in midair. Then, he instantly appeared in midair a few hundred feet away. Clang! Yifan, who appeared again, stretched out one hand and directly pulled out the snake's shadow sword from his waist. The moment the snake's shadow appeared, it shone brilliantly. Yifan, who was in midair, turned his body, and the sword followed him. He waved the god weapon in his hand at the sand belt that was constantly moving in the desert below and heavily slashed down. Whoosh! A thick silver arc of light suddenly shot out from the shining snake's shadow sword and went straight for the sea of sand below. Its speed was so fast that it arrived in the blink of an eye. This time, Yifan had the intention to kill. His first move was a killer move. Boom! A loud sound was heard. Yellow sand splattered everywhere. The dazzling silver arc of light instantly rushed into the yellow sand. Chi! After the loud sound, a green smoke rose from the yellow sand below. The huge sand belt continued to move. However, compared to before, the speed of the sand belt was much faster this time. This fire snake skin was so hard. Yifan, who was in midair, saw this situation and frowned. He was very clear about the power of his move just now. Not to mention a living creature. Even a 1,000-pound boulder would be instantly frozen and turned into ice chips. However, such a powerful move only made the other party emit a green smoke. Yifan really did not dare to believe this. The other party had taken a fatal blow when he was unprepared, but the result was like scratching an itch through a boot. In fact, Yifan had thought too simply of this matter. Underneath this sand belt was indeed a 1,000-year fire snake, as Yifan had thought. However, even a wise man would make a mistake. Yifan only knew that the snake's shadow sword in his hand was cold and was the nemesis of the 1,000-year fire snake. He did not know that everything had an opposite. The snake's shadow sword was the nemesis of the 1,000-year fire snake, but conversely, the 1,000-year fire snake was also the nemesis of the snake's shadow sword. This was the so-called reason why water and fire were incompatible. If Yifan's move had been used on other spirit creatures, it would have been completely frozen, unable to move. However, to the blazing 1,000-year fire snake, this move could only make it feel a little pain. It was not a big deal. Chapter 439. Buzz. Under Yi Fan's control, the snake shadow sword let out a crisp sound in an instant. White light exploded and cold air exploded. When the snake shadow sword's white light reached a height of 10 feet, Yi Fan held the sword hilt and threw it fiercely at the gradually sinking sand belt. Whoosh! The brilliant snake shadow sword was like a white meteor, dragging a long tail as it whizzed towards the 1,000-year fire snake in the sea of sand. Boom! White light exploded and waves of air spread out. The biting cold snake shadow sword directly pierced the 1,000-year fire snake that was quickly slithering in the sea of sand. The huge wave of air shook the yellow sand around the snake shadow sword, creating a 10 feet deep and 10 feet wide sand pit. Within the sand pit, the snake's body, which was more than 30 feet thick and covered in scales, was impressively visible. The snake's body was fiery red, and its huge scales were like basins. On the snake's body, the snake's shadow sword shone with white light and pierced all the way to the hilt. It hit. Yi Fan, who was in midair, thought to himself. He stretched out his hand and bent his fingers into a claw. He used his spiritual energy to pull the snake shadow sword through the air. Whoosh! The snake shadow sword was pulled out and flew back into Yi Fan's hand. Pooh! As the snake shadow sword was quickly pulled out, a pillar of blood instantly gushed out from the fire snake's wound. The pillar of fiery red blood spurted out more than 30 feet high. It was abnormally hot like magma. Chi! After the fire snake's blood fell onto the sand, it instantly melted the sand, forming pieces of translucent amber-like sand. What a good 1,000-year fire snake actually has such heat. Yi Fan was shocked. After the pillar of blood stopped gushing out, Yi Fan put the snake shadow sword back into his waist and slowly landed on the sand. Whoosh! Just as Yi Fan's feet touched the ground, the snake in the sand pit quickly slithered away and continued to dive. It was actually still alive. Yi Fan's pupils instantly contracted. At this time, it was already too late to pull out the snake shadow sword. In a moment of desperation, Yi Fan gathered the spiritual energy in his body into his palm and stretched it out towards the rapidly diving fire snake. Boom! 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 Yi Fan sent out 3 palm strikes in succession, each strike landing on the 1,000-year fire snake's wound. Even though the fiery serpent's body was hidden under the sea of sand, the heat emitted from its wound was difficult to hide. Yi Fan's 5 senses were extremely sharp, so naturally, he knew where the fiery serpent's wound was. Yi Fan's mysterious sky secret art required his spiritual energy to be domineering and his strength to be ferocious. The palm strikes he sent out were naturally not normal. In addition, the fire snake's wound was cut open by the snake shadow sword, so it would be difficult for it to heal in a short period of time. Yi Fan's palm strikes directly penetrated the sand sea, going through the fire snake's wound and into the fire snake's body. The fire snake in the sand sea was instantly in great pain from Yi Fan's consecutive strikes. It stopped diving and instead began to quickly float up in the opposite direction. He had endured the expert outside, but who would have thought that the other party would take a mile after taking an inch? Intolerable. There was no need to endure any more. Roar! An angry roar was heard, and the yellow sand suddenly exploded. A 5-zhong thick snake head broke out of the ground, like a huge dragon soaring into the sky from the sand sea. The thick fiery red snake body gradually rushed up in front of Yi Fan, and the wind it brought along caused Yi Fan's white robe to flutter loudly. Yi Fan was shocked under the mask. He had never thought that the fire snake would be so huge. It was not the slightest bit inferior to the 1,000-year-old ice snake in the northernmost glacier. What made him feel even more inconceivable was that the fire snake actually turned back when it clearly could have escaped. Whoosh! As the fire snake's 300-zhong-long body gradually emerged from the sand sea under Yi Fan's feet began to rapidly sink. Bufan Kuan, be careful. Akatsuki, who was more than 10 zhong away, was worried about Yi Fan's safety and shouted loudly. Whoosh! Before the yellow sand under his feet sank, Yi Fan used his movement technique again instantly disappearing from his original spot and instantly appearing beside Akatsuki. As the yellow sand gradually dispersed, the true appearance of the 1,000-year-old fire snake appeared in front of the two people. The fire snake's entire body was red, and its eyes were as red as blood. Its body was more than 300 jong long, and its whole body was covered with red scales. Under the scorching sun, the scales on its body were shining with a red light, dazzling the eyes. On both sides of the snake's neck, a pair of huge snake wings spread outwards. The mountain-like body of the snake coiled more than 10 times above the sand sea. Its huge snake head was held high, and it was majestically looking down below like a huge dragon. What was even more inconceivable was that in the middle of the fire snake's forehead, there was a fist-sized bright red bead floating above. It was overflowing with brilliant colors, and it was sparkling brightly. Akatsuki, who was wearing the crystal mask, immediately opened her beautiful eyes wide and sucked in a breath of cold air when she saw this scene. What kind of snake is this? This is clearly a huge dragon, facing the aura of a king emitted by the fire snake. Akatsuki felt a terrifying pressure. This pressure pressed down on her to the point that she almost couldn't breathe. The fire snake in front of them clearly had intelligence. It didn't spit out frightening tongues like other snakes, nor did it directly pounce on the opponent like other fierce beasts. Instead, it was majestically entrenched there, staring straight at Yi Fan and Akatsuki. For some reason, Akatsuki didn't feel the killing intent emitted by the fire snake. Instead, she felt that the fire snake's gaze revealed a few traces of calmness, just like a mature and steady middle-aged man. Chapter 440. You take Xiao Zhao and leave this place first, then wait for me 10 miles away, Yi Fan said as he took off the wide brim of his hat, then reached out and picked up Baihu, who was lying behind his neck, and handed her over to Akatsuki. When it saw Baihu with a vermilion forehead and Yi Fan with a head full of silver hair, the huge fire snake narrowed its eyes and tilted its head, seemingly a little surprised. Woo! When it saw the huge dragon-like guy in front of it, Baihu immediately struggled in Akatsuki's arms, desperately trying to jump onto Yi Fan's body. Xiao Zhao, listen to me. Yi Fan stared at the fire snake in front of him and calmly said. After the struggling Baihu heard Yi Fan's words, it immediately whimpered and stopped struggling. Yi Fan's tone was firm and resolute when he said this. It was completely different from how he usually sounded. I'll stay and help you. Akatsuki, who was holding Baihu, turned her head to look at Yi Fan. No need, Yi Fan said to Akatsuki. You take care of Xiao Zhao. Leave this to me. Then be careful. Akatsuki knew that with her cultivation, she was no match for the 1,000-year-old fire snake in front of her. If she stayed here, she would only distract Yi Fan, so she had no choice but to agree to Yi Fan's arrangement. No matter what happens later, don't come over, Yi Fan said. Just wait for me 10 miles away. Akatsuki nodded. Then the tip of her foot touched the ground, rose into the air, and quickly flew away. In the process of leaving, Baihu kept looking back at Yi Fan, its eyes full of reluctance. It knew in its heart that what awaited Yi Fan was yet another fierce battle. After Akatsuki left, Yi Fan slowly pulled out the snake's shadow sword from his waist. The 1,000-year-old fire snake stared at Yi Fan with a pair of blood-red eyes that were as big as tires. Evil creature, Yi Fan shouted and instantly activated his movement technique. Shua! Yi Fan disappeared from where he stood. The 1,000-year-old fire snake narrowed its eyes. It quickly turned its thick body and swung its long red tail into the air. Bang! A muffled sound came from the sky, and a shadow flew down in an instant. Boom! Waves of chi dispersed in all directions, and yellow sand flew everywhere. A sand pit that was several feet in size suddenly appeared. In the sand pit, the masked Yi Fan lay there with a dazed look on his face. Never in his wildest dreams would he have thought that this fire snake would be able to pinpoint his position so quickly and deliver such a heavy blow in an instant. His intention to attack had been clearly seen through by this guy. As Yifan thought to himself, he slowly stood up from the huge sand pit beneath him. The fire snake's attack just now carried at least 500 kilograms of force. If it were a normal person, they would have already been smashed to pieces. However, Yifan was not a normal person. The second level of the mysterious guy's secret technique had already strengthened all the bones in his body. In addition, every time he made a move, he would place a layer of spirit energy around his body. Therefore, even though the fire snake's attack had a force of 500 kilograms and was fierce and powerful, it had not injured him in the slightest. Phew! After standing up, Yifan let out a breath and calmed himself down. His first move had been easily seen through by his opponent, and he had succeeded in his counterattack. If it were anyone else, they would definitely be angry out of humiliation. However, Yifan did not do that. The most important thing to avoid when facing an enemy was to be impatient. This was a principle that he had understood since he was young. The more disadvantaged he was, the more he needed to maintain a clear and calm mind. Moreover, he was not at a disadvantage at all right now. The huge fire snake was still quietly entrenched there, its blood-red eyes continuing to stare at Yifan. Whoosh! After Yifan calmed himself down, his figure once again disappeared from the sand pit. This time, he used 30% of his spirit energy to activate his movement technique. He wanted to see if this fire snake could still stop his attack. Yifan's disappearance once again did not surprise the fire snake. At the same time that Yifan used his movement technique, it once again waved its thick snake tail, flicking it high up and quickly stabbing it into the air. Whoosh! In the blink of an eye, Yifan's figure appeared 10 meters above the fire snake's head. He held his sword with one hand and prepared to stab the snake shadow sword into the fire snake's head. However, just as he was about to jump down, the fire snake's thick snake tail instantly stabbed at him from below. His intentions had been seen through by this fellow again. Yifan was shocked. In the blink of an eye, the tip of the fire snake's tail had already rushed in front of Yifan. Shwa! At this time, Yifan had no time to think. Seeing the snake's tail stabbing at him, he suddenly activated the snake's shadow sword in his hand and fiercely chopped down at the snake's tail. Shwa! The fire serpent seemed to know that the divine weapon in Yifan's hand was not to be trifled with. Therefore, the moment Yifan slashed downwards with the snake shadow sword, the serpent's tail that was soaring into the sky instantly moved away. While it avoided the divine weapon in Yifan's hand, it continued to charge towards Yifan. The fire snake's tail was extremely fast, but Yifan's movement technique was even faster. The moment the snake's tail dodged the snake shadow sword, Yifan's figure once again disappeared into thin air. Whoosh! The snake's tail missed. Shwa! Yifan reappeared in the desert. Whoosh! The fire snake once again coiled up and continued to look at Yifan. Looking at the fire snake coiled up in front of him like a huge dragon, Yifan was in a difficult position. Chapter 441. However, in terms of speed, the fire snake was not faster than him. Its speed was inferior to his own, but it was able to block his attack and counterattack at the same time. If it was able to do this, then there was only one explanation. This fire serpent could predict his attack trajectory in advance, and even predict his attack style in advance. Thinking of this, Yifan was shocked and sucked in a breath of cold air. If the fire snake really had such an ability, then even if he unsealed the ice dragon, he would not be able to kill it. But here came a problem. Just now, he had clearly stabbed the snake's shadow sword into the fire snake's body. How could he explain this? If it had the ability to predict, why didn't it dodge just now? Why didn't it take the initiative to attack him? Yifan's mind was in a mess. He held the snake's shadow sword and stood there quietly, not knowing what to do. Attack? The fire snake easily saw through his intentions. Everything was in vain. Not attacking. If this scourge was not eliminated, who knew how many lives would be lost in the future? The man and the snake just stared at each other like this. Neither of them made a move. After staring at each other for about 10 minutes, the fire snake suddenly raised its head and hissed, its voice reaching the sky. Yi Fan frowned and once again held the snake's shadow sword in his hand, ready to attack at any time. However, the next scene was unexpected to Yi Fan. After the fire snake hissed, it immediately dived into the desert below. Boom! Waves of air spread out and yellow sand filled the sky. The huge fire snake directly rushed into the desert. Its body was covered in red scales and looked like a huge dragon. It also quickly dived into the sea of sand. Seeing this, Yi Fan did not dare to be careless. He immediately circulated the spiritual energy in his body and raised his body dozens of feet. He vigilantly looked at the sea of sand below. He was worried that the fire snake would suddenly explode, like just now. However, his worries were unnecessary. As the sand swelled lower and lower, the rustling sound of the fire snake moving through the sea of sand also became smaller and smaller. In the end, it completely disappeared. Seeing that the fire snake had already left, Yi Fan could only circulate his movement technique and quickly rush in the direction that Akatsuki had left. When the two of them returned to the tavern in Fire Dragon Town, the sun was setting in the west and the sky was getting dark. Compared to the scorching heat of the day, the temperature at night was very cool and even a little chilly. When the middle-aged couple in the tavern saw the two of them return, they hurriedly served up the sumptuous dishes they had prepared for the entire afternoon. In addition, they also prepared fragrant tea and pastries to entertain the two of them. After Yi Fan and Yu Hongji left, the couple cleaned the tables and chairs in the tavern until they were spotless. There was not a speck of dust on them. 8 tables were put together and a brand new bedding was laid out. A large and comfortable bed was created. After witnessing the means of this immortal couple, hope rekindled in the hearts of the husband and wife. It was the first time in their lives that they had seen something like this. In particular, Yi Fan's move of setting up a spirit barrier in the house was something that the couple had never seen or heard of before. With these two present, the great immortal would most likely not come rashly. Wine, dishes, a bed, fragrant tea, and pastries. Looking at the things in front of him, Yi Fan could not help but shake his head and smile wryly. It seemed like they really thought of themselves as immortals. After eating, the sky was completely dark. The middle-aged man lit an oil lamp and placed it in the tavern hall where Yi Fan was. The swaying orange flame made the entire room look mysterious. After the middle-aged man placed the oil lamp, he said to Yi Fan and Akatsuki apologetically, "Mr. Ishihara, Ms. Akatsuki, the conditions here are simple and can't be compared to those inns in town. Please excuse us." "Manager Du, you're too kind," Yi Fan, who was sitting on the chair, said to the middle-aged man. "This place is pretty good. Sorry to trouble you." "Look at what you're saying. It's already a blessing that both of you can stay here. How can you say that it's troublesome?" The man with the surname Du said honestly, "With both of you here, both of us feel much more at ease. It's best that both of you don't go out for the next 2 days. Stay at home and don't go anywhere." Yi Fan said, "These 2 days are the deadline that the evil thing gave you. It should come again. Mr. Ishihara, please help us this time," the man with the surname Du said as he came in front of Yi Fan. He knelt on the ground and bowed with his hands in front of him. "We only have one daughter, Little Blossom. We can't let that thing take her away." The man wiped his tears as he said that. "What are you doing? Get up quickly," Yi Fan said as he quickly got up and helped the man up. "Don't worry. I'm here. Your daughter will be fine." When a man heard what Yi Fan said, he stood up. "Father." At the bedroom door, a little girl in floral clothing stood there timidly and called out in a childish voice. The middle-aged woman stood behind the little girl and looked at Yi Fan and Akatsuki with gratitude. "Little Blossom, come here." The man reached out and beckoned the little girl. The little girl ran over and came in front of the man. The middle-aged woman followed her out. "Quick, go and kowtow to our benefactor," the man said to the little girl. The little girl turned around and looked at Yi Fan, who was wearing a white jade mask. She bit her lower lip and seemed to be a little scared. "Go quickly," the man urged. After hearing her father's urging, the little girl slowly walked towards Yi Fan and came in front of Yi Fan. "Benefactor, little Blossom kowtows to you," the little girl said as she was about to kneel. Yi Fan immediately reached out and held her. Chapter 442. "Little girl, what's your name? How old are you this year?" Yi Fan asked. The little girl in front of him had delicate features, fair skin, and a pair of pigtails. She looked very likable. "My name is Xiaohua. I'm 6 years old this year." The little girl suddenly flashed a pair of big watery eyes and answered timidly. "This thing, are you afraid?" Yi Fan pointed at the mask on his face and asked the little girl. The little girl nodded her head. On the night of the incident in Flaming Dragon Town, she also saw the evil creature in her dream. At first glance, the skull mask of the evil creature was quite similar to Yi Fan's white jade mask. "Don't be afraid," Yi Fan said to the little girl as he reached out and lifted the little girl up and placed her on his lap. "Come, touch it." The little girl looked at Yi Fan's eyes through the mask, as if she was making a decision. "It's okay, just touch it," Yi Fan said as he gently held the little girl's chubby hand and placed it on his mask. The little girl opened her eyes wide with a look of curiosity. "How is it? Is it fun?" Yi Fan teased the little girl. The little girl nodded her head and a smile appeared on her face. "I'll show you a magic trick, okay?" Yi Fan said with a smile. "You could do magic tricks?" The little girl was pleasantly surprised. "Of course, watch carefully." Yi Fan reached his hand into the hat and directly carried out the snow-white fur Baihu. Baihu's appearance made the little girl sitting on Yi Fan's lap very excited. Children of her age especially liked small animals. "Her name is Xiao Zhao. You could be friends," Yi Fan said to the little girl as he stroked Baihu's smooth fur. "Can I hug him?" The little girl looked at Yi Fan with a sincere expression. "Sure," Yi Fan said as he handed Baihu to the little girl. "That's great." The little girl clapped her hands and took Baihu from Yi Fan. Baihu licked the little girl's face, making the little girl giggle. "Go and play." Yi Fan put down the little girl's newspaper. "Xiao Zhao, let's go. I'll take you to eat something delicious." The little girl hugged Baihu and skipped away with a smile. In just a short while, Yi Fan had swept away the shadow in the little girl's heart, allowing her to laugh like a child of her age. Akatsuki looked at Yi Fan, her eyes suddenly becoming moist. If his wife was still alive, if none of this had happened, the man in front of him would definitely be a good husband and a good father. However, all this still happened in the end. The painful experience of losing his beloved wife had caused this man to hate evil as if it were his enemy, and he was vicious and merciless. His cultivation was high, and his hair was silver. This man had suffered too much, too much. Akatsuki secretly made up her mind that no matter what, she would help this man and his beloved wife reunite as soon as possible. Although this made her feel a little disappointed, she really couldn't bear to see Yi Fan being tortured like this. "Shopkeeper Du, there's one thing I want to ask you." After the little girl left with Baihu, Yi Fan asked the middle-aged man. "Just ask as long as it's something that we know." The man replied, "I heard from your wife that there are a lot of ghosts in the nearby desert." Yi Fan asked, "There are indeed a lot of ghosts." The man replied, "I've heard from passing merchants that many people died of thirst while crossing the desert, but their water bags were full. There were also people who met handsome men and beautiful women when they spent the night in the desert. As a result, they were found dead in their tents the next morning, with no heart left in their stomachs. There are so many things like this that I can't tell you all about it. In addition to ghosts, are there any huge animals in the desert, for example?" Yi Fan slowed down and asked snakes. "Snake?" The middle-aged man looked puzzled. "How big is the snake?" In his eyes, snakes were not huge animals at all. "It's 50 or 60 feet thick and more than 1,000 feet long." Yi Fan said, "We met it in the desert this afternoon." "More than 1,000 feet long?" The man's face suddenly changed after hearing Yi Fan's words. Was it covered with red scales? Did it have a dragon pearl on its head? It was indeed covered with red scales and had a red pearl on its head. Yi Fan said and then asked, "Why, have you seen it? What are you talking about? How can we be so lucky?" The woman standing next to the middle-aged man said with a shocked face. Lucky? What kind of lucky? Yi Fan asked with a frown. The two of you may not know this, but what you've seen today is not a snake at all. It's a fire dragon. It's the guardian of our fire dragon town for generations, the middle-aged man said to Yi Fan in an envious tone. The two of you are so lucky to have met the dragon god as soon as you arrived at the fire dragon town. In the future, the two of you will definitely have a long life and live to 100 years old. Chapter 443. Although the fire dragon you saw today has a snake's body, it's a dragon species. Everyone in our town knows about it, the man explained. According to the county records here, a fire dragon once became an immortal here in the Tang dynasty during the Jingguan period. What you two saw today is the descendant of the immortal fire dragon. This is also the origin of the town's name. Less than 30 miles east of the town, there's a fire dragon temple. It enshrines the fire dragon immortal, the middle-aged woman said. That temple has existed for at least hundreds of years. Yi Fan frowned after hearing that. For what you said, the fire snake? Oh no, the fire dragon we saw today doesn't harm people. It's the guardian of our fire dragon town. How can it harm people? The middle-aged man hurriedly said. You may not know this, but for hundreds of years, this fire dragon will appear beside the fire dragon temple at noon on the 9th day of the double 9th festival and kowtow to the fire dragon immortal. Oh, is there such a thing? The middle-aged man's words made Yi Fan feel a little incredulous. 15 years ago, I saw it with my own eyes, the man said solemnly. At that time, I was still a child. My father led me to squeeze into the crowd and stood on the sand, doomed to watch it from afar. Can we still see it on the double 9th festival now? Akatsuki asked. Now? Sigh. The middle-aged man sighed and said, We can't see it now. Why? Yi Fan asked. It's sad and no longer protects our fire dragon town. The middle-aged man said with a sad look. If it was still protecting our town, how could it be now? Sigh. The middle-aged man sighed deeply. Sack. Akatsuki, who was on the side, asked in confusion. The middle-aged man nodded. What's the matter? Yi Fan asked. You two may not know, but there was not only one fire dragon, but two. The middle-aged woman on the side saw her husband's sad face and explained to them. Two. Akatsuki was surprised. They are a couple, the middle-aged woman said. Husband and wife? Akatsuki was shocked again. Yes. The middle-aged woman nodded. The middle-aged woman's words didn't surprise Yi Fan. All such fays were in pairs. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to reproduce. The 1,000-year-old ice snake in the northernmost glacier was like this, and the fire snake here was no exception. Was the fire snake we saw today male or female? Yi Fan asked. Although he had learned from the couple that the fire snake was a dragon species, it had not yet evolved into a dragon, so it was more appropriate to call it a fire snake. It's a male. The middle-aged man lowered his head and said, The female is dead. Dead? Yi Fan frowned when he heard that. How'd he die? He was killed, the middle-aged man said in a low voice. His chest was cut open and his body was left in the desert. Many people saw it. Yi Fan frowned when he heard that. Why? Akatsuki couldn't bear it and asked, Why did he kill it? What else could it be? The middle-aged man raised his head, looking sad and indignant. The male dragon's dragon pearl and the female dragon's inner core. The middle-aged man's words caused Yi Fan to be shocked. Inner core. The fire snake's inner core. Could the fire snake's inner core in his body belong to the female snake? Who killed the fire snake? Yi Fan asked with a frown. Westerners. The middle-aged man gritted his teeth and clenched his fists. 3 Westerners killed the female dragon. Westerners. Yi Fan's pupil shrank when he heard these 3 words. The fire snake's inner core in his body really did belong to the female snake. Yi Fan suddenly understood why the fire snake didn't attack him. He also understood why it could predict his attack intentions in advance. The reason was simple. The inner core of its wife was in his body. The reason why the male snake had the upper hand was not only because it had 1,000 years of cultivation, but also because of the inner core. The inner core was the manifestation of essence, energy, and spirit. The inner core in his body contained almost all of the female snake's essence, energy, and spirit. The fire snake couple had been together for nearly 1,000 years. They couldn't be any more familiar with each other's aura. Now that the inner core was in his body, no matter what he did, the inner core's aura would be enough for the male snake to predict it in advance. As the saying goes, know thyself and know thy enemy, and thou shalt be victorious in every battle. If his attack intentions were completely grasped by his opponent, no matter how fast his movements were or how fierce his moves were, it would be useless and useless. When did this happen? Yi Fan asked the middle-aged man. This happened 15 years ago, the middle-aged man recalled with a sad face. Since then, the fire dragon never appeared in the fire dragon temple again. It also stopped protecting this town. Sigh, what a sin. Chapter 444. After Yi Fan listened to the words of the two people, he began to sympathize with the fire dragon. He had personally experienced the pain of losing his wife. That kind of feeling was simply unable to live, unable to die. It was so painful that he wished he was dead. The fire dragon was originally wholeheartedly protecting the humans, but in the end, the humans cut open its wife's belly and forcibly took her inner core. It was not the fire dragon who did such a thing, but the humans. Yi Fan suddenly felt that he was somewhat in the same boat as the fire dragon. They both lost their wives and were full of anger. The female snake's inner core was taken, and she died in the underworld. The 3 souls of his beloved wife were captured, and her life was uncertain. The fire dragon gave up its original intention, and its heart was like dead ashes. It threw away everything, and it was like a dead tree. In order to take revenge on the humans, the fire dragon's ferocious nature took hundreds of lives in an instant. In order to avenge his wife, it started a massacre, and the number of lives that died at its hands numbered in the hundreds. At this time, Yi Fan was not angry with the fire dragon that he had fought before. Instead, he felt a sense of sympathy. It seems that the fire dragon also hated because of love, so it killed passers-by. After listening to all that the middle-aged couple said, Akatsuki couldn't help but sigh. Killed passers-by? Akatsuki's words made the middle-aged couple look at each other, puzzled. Seeing this situation, Akatsuki told the couple about the hundreds of bones found in the desert in the afternoon. The couple was stunned at first, then they shook their heads. No, the middle-aged man spoke first. Although the dragon god is completely disappointed in humans, it would never do such a thing. The dragon god has never hurt other small animals in the desert, let alone humans. This matter is definitely not what you two said. Why are you so sure that it was not done? Then how do you explain its appearance next to the bones? Yi Fan asked the middle-aged man. This matter is definitely not done by the dragon god, the man said to Yi Fan. For hundreds of years, I've only heard of the dragon god appearing to save people, but I have never heard of it hurting people. Maybe it's taking revenge on humans? Akatsuki asked. That's impossible, the middle-aged man continued. If that was the case, the dragon god could have just come to the town and slaughtered everyone. Why would he go through so much trouble? Yi Fan and Akatsuki did not respond. The middle-aged man's words were not without reason. He was right. With fire snakes' 1,000 years of cultivation, it would only take him an instant to wipe out the entire town. There was no need for him to ambush passers-by in the desert. As for the dragon god's appearance near the bones, that doesn't mean anything. With all due respect, the middle-aged man said as he cupped his fist at Yi Fan. If a third party had appeared at that time, would they have thought that the two of you were responsible for this? No matter what, the two of you didn't see it with your own eyes. It's just your intuition. Yi Fan and Akatsuki looked at each other, but still did not speak. Also, Miss Akatsuki just said that Ishihara-san had fought with the dragon god. I'll take the liberty to ask you, the middle-aged man said as he looked at Yi Fan. Did the dragon god take the initiative to attack you? The middle-aged man's words directly hit the crux of the matter, leaving Yi Fan speechless and stunned on the spot. At this time, He was completely convinced and had nothing to say. The reason was very simple. Akatsuki had just told the middle-aged man about his fight with the fire snake and did not mention the specific details. However, this man had directly guessed the fact that the fire snake did not take the initiative to attack him. All the signs indicated that he had misunderstood the fire snake. Thinking of this, Yifan could not help but feel regretful. Not only had he forced the crime of murder onto the fire snake, but he had also stabbed it with the snake's shadow sword. If not for the fire snake's profound cultivation and foresight of his intention to attack, it might have already died under his snake's shadow sword. If that was really the case, then his sin was simply unforgivable. What made Yifan feel even more guilty was that he was suppressing the Niden of the fire snake's wife in his body. However, the fire snake had actually restrained itself in the face of his unreasonable provocation and had not taken the initiative to attack him. Compared to the fire snake, he was simply a villain from head to toe. Thinking of this, Yifan stood up from his seat. He made a decision that would make him atone for his sins. He would find the fire snake and apologize to it to atone for his sins. Also, he would return the 1,000-year-old Niden that belonged to the fire snake's wife in his body to its rightful owner. Seeing Yifan stand up, the middle-aged man immediately stood up and looked at Yifan apologetically. He thought that he had said something wrong and had offended Yifan. He now somewhat regretted speaking too bluntly just now. "Taro, what's wrong with you?" Akatsuki also felt that Yifan's reaction was somewhat strange. "Chiyue, you and Xiao Zhao stay here, I'm going out." Yifan turned his head and said to Akatsuki, "Going out." When Akatsuki heard that Yifan was going out alone, she immediately stood up. "Where are you going?" "I'm going to the desert," Yifan said. "To the desert? Now?" Akatsuki did not understand why Yifan would suddenly do this. Chapter 445. "I'll go with you," Akatsuki said to Yifan as she picked up the red sword on the table. Although she didn't know why Yifan wanted to go to the desert at this time, she still decided to go with Yifan. "Akatsuki, you and Xiao Zhao stay here," Yifan said as he reached out and pressed down on Akatsuki's sword. "There are only 2 days left until the deadline set by the two evil beings. It's better for you to stay here and take care of their safety. Although there's a spirit barrier here, you still have to be careful. If you're here, I'll be more at ease. But you're alone." Akatsuki still wanted to insist. "Don't worry, I'm fine. I'll be back in 2 hours at most," Yifan said to Akatsuki. "Then be careful," Akatsuki said with concern. "I'll wait for you to come back." At this time, her tone was as if she and Yifan were really husband and wife. Yifan frowned after hearing this. Akatsuki's words reminded him of his beloved wife, Fujiwara no Chiko. Perhaps it was because they were both Japanese, but their tones, attitudes, and even voices were very similar. In addition, their eyes were almost exactly the same as Fujiwara no Chiko's. Yifan vaguely felt as if his beloved wife was standing in front of him at this time. However, this was only a matter of a moment. Yifan quickly regained his senses from this illusion. He nodded to Akatsuki and turned to leave the room. After leaving the room, Yifan didn't use the cloud riding technique. Instead, he directly activated the spirit power in his body and used a peerless movement technique. Whoosh! The moment Yifan stepped out of the room, his body disappeared in an instant. In the tavern, the couple's mouths instantly turned into an O shape. The middle-aged man rubbed his eyes a few times. He couldn't believe that a living person could disappear into thin air in the blink of an eye. Akatsuki quickly walked to the door. She held the door frame with her hand and looked up at the sky. Above Yikong, a 5-colored light quickly streaked across the sky, leaving a long afterimage. In the vast Yikong, Yifan's figure quickly passed through the clouds and went straight to the heart of the desert. Compared to daytime, it was much easier to find the fire snake at night. During the day, the sun was scorching hot in the sky. The entire desert was like a huge brazier. The fire snake's body was extremely hot. If it was hidden under the hot sand, it wouldn't be easy to find. It would be difficult to find it. But when it was nighttime, things would be much easier to handle. There was a huge difference in temperature between day and night. The hot sand during the day would become as cold as water at night. This way, the extremely high temperatures bodies was a very obvious heat source. As long as the heat source, the fire. 2. High in the sky, Yifan flew at high speed while carefully perceiving the changes in the temperature of the desert below. The desert was quiet. There wasn't even a trace of wind. It was the 12th day of the lunar calendar. The moon hanging over the desert was almost full. The cold light poured over the desert, creating a unique scenery. With 20% of his spiritual power, Yifan used less than the time it took to drink a cup of tea to arrive at the heart of the desert, where he had encountered the fire snake during the day. Shua! High in the sky, Yifan's figure flashed, and he instantly stood on the desert. The cool breeze Mingyu, the desert's yellow sand. Yifan stood alone on the yellow sand, facing the three people Mingyu. From a tavern here, he had found a lot of heat sources, but those were some common desert animals, lizards, gerbils, scorpions, and so on. There weren't any obvious large heat sources. Since he couldn't perceive the heat source, he could only listen. The fire snake's body was very big. Even the slightest movement would make a big noise. Thinking of this, Yifan quietly closed his eyes and listened attentively to all the sounds in the desert. Because there were few people here, the air was dry, and the noise was much less than in other places. It was very advantageous for Yifan to distinguish the sound. Sha sha sha. Sure enough, with Yifan's keen hearing, a continuous rustling sound entered his ears. This sound was very loud, and it didn't stop. Moreover, it was moving very fast. It didn't sound like the sound of other desert animals. It was the fire snake. Yifan opened his eyes. Shua! Yifan once again used his movement technique and flew high in the sky. The sound of the fire snake moving across the sea of sand was about 300 miles away from him. If Yifan wanted to, he would be able to arrive above the fire snake in an instant. But Yifan didn't do this. He wanted to see for himself if the fire snake really didn't hurt people like the middle-aged couple said. At this time, Yifan was already above the clouds, and he was more than 10,000 feet away from the desert below. At this distance, the fire snake couldn't find him at all. Yifan, who was above the clouds, activated his eyesight and looked in the direction of the sound. Hua! Hua! 300 miles away, the 1,000-year-old fire snake, which was hundreds of feet long and looked like a dragon, was moving its huge body, winding its way across the endless sea of sand. The cold moonlight poured down from the night sky, illuminating the red scales on the fiery serpent's body and making them sparkle. Chapter 446. It was already late at night, and all kinds of nocturnal creatures in the desert began to come out to look for food. There were fast-crawling lizards, spitting sand snakes, timid but agile gerbils, poisonous scorpions, and wolves crossing the desert from next door. When these desert animals saw the red light emitted by the fire snake from afar, they immediately stopped looking for food and obediently crawled on both sides of the desert, as if they had seen their king. The lizards stopped hissing, the sand snakes lowered their heads, the timid gerbils stopped chewing, and the wolves all lay on the ground with their heads on their front paws. Even the poisonous scorpions with their tails raised up obediently put down their tails and quickly closed their big pincers, becoming motionless. In the blink of an eye, all kinds of animals were neatly crawling on both sides of the desert, stretching for several miles. They stopped looking for food, stopped fighting each other, and respectfully bowed to the fire snake that was passing by this desert. The scene in front of him made Yifan, who was above the clouds, frown. Everything was as the middle-aged couple had said. The fire snake did not attack other weak animals. If it was really aggressive, these animals would have already fled in all directions and would not have shown such respectful etiquette. Looking at the scab wound on the fire snake's body that he had made with the snake's shadow sword, Yifan's heart was filled with guilt. Whoosh! Whoosh! The fire snake passed through the crowd of animals and continued to crawl forward. It could be seen that it was hurrying through the night. Where would it go at this time of night? Yifan thought. This fire snake was the complete opposite of the ice snakes in the northernmost glaciers. The ice snakes liked the cold, and their nests were all under the glaciers. The fire snake liked the heat, and its nest should be under the desert. The yellow sand in the desert had been exposed to the sun for an entire day, and the temperature was extremely high. Although the sand on the surface had cooled down at night, the depths of the desert were still very warm. This fire snake did not rest in its warm nest at this time of night, but came out to hurry. There must be something special. Thinking of the difficult situation of Flaming Dragon Town, Yifan decided to continue following the fire snake and see where it was going. The man and the snake continued their journey in their own ways. After the time it took for an incense stick to burn, the huge body of the fire snake stopped in front of a tall temple. The temple was completely built with stone materials, with cornices and arches, giving off a magnificent aura. In front of the temple, a pair of huge stone lighthouses were lined up on both sides. They were exquisitely carved and quaint. Above the entrance of the temple, there was a huge stone plaque hanging on it, with the words Fire Dragon Temple, written in ancient gilded seal script. Fire Dragon Temple? Above the clouds, Yifan frowned. Shopkeeper Du had told him that every 9 days, Fiery Snake would come here and kowtow to a mortal fire dragon, who was enshrined there. After that, Fire Snake lost his partner and no longer trusted humans. From then on, he never appeared in front of the Fire Dragon Temple again. Now, it seemed that things were not as what Manager Du had described. The fire snake would still come here to worship its ancestor, Immortal Fire Dragon. However, it would no longer appear in front of people. Instead, it would choose to do so in the dead of night. Buzz. Just as Yifan was making guesses in his heart, the fire serpent that was coiled up in front of the temple's entrance suddenly glowed with a bright red light. The dragon, or that was floating above its forehead, shone even brighter. Swoosh! Amidst the dazzling light, the huge body of the fire snake shrank in an instant. The originally 300 zhang long body turned into a 10 zhang long red snake in the blink of an eye. As expected of a dragon species, it could change its size, rise and fall. Above the clouds, Yifan praised in his heart. He understood the intention of the fire snake. The reason why the fire snake shrank its body was to enter the Fire Dragon Temple in front of him. Although this Fire Dragon Temple was incomparably magnificent, it was still too small for the huge body of the fire snake. After the fire snake shrank, the dragon pearl on its forehead became 3 inches long. It lifted its tail and gently swung it at the huge temple door. Creak! The huge temple door slowly opened. The fire snake swayed its body and slithered in. The temple door closed again. Above the clouds, Yifan saw the fire snake enter the Fire Dragon Temple and immediately activated his movement technique. Whoosh! Yifan's figure disappeared in an instant and reappeared above the desert in an instant. He slowly walked to the front of the temple door and stood there motionlessly, quietly waiting for the fire snake to come out. It was now kowtowing to its ancestors, so he couldn't rashly go in and disturb it. After the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, the temple door slowly opened again. A burst of red light shone from the temple door. Immediately afterward, the fire snake with the red pearl on its head slowly crawled out. Yifan standing in front of the fire snake didn't surprise it. Actually, when Yifan descended from the clouds just now, it had already sensed the aura of its beloved wife's inner core when it was kowtowing to its ancestors in the Fire Dragon Temple. It seemed that this young man wouldn't give up until he got rid of it. Thinking of this, the fire snake closed the temple door with its tail and slowly slithered toward Yifan. Yifan calmly looked at the fire snake that was getting closer and closer, feeling guilty in his heart again. His wife's inner core was suppressed in his body, and then he indiscriminately attacked and injured the other party. This made him feel extremely ashamed. The fire snake stopped 10 meters away from Yifan. Chapter 447. I've wrongly accused you today, Yi Fan said as he took off the hat on his head. "I've come to ask for your forgiveness." As Yi Fan spoke, he knelt down on one knee. What was right, and what was wrong. This matter was his fault from beginning to end. Since he was wrong, he should bring a bramble and ask for forgiveness. There was no room for ambiguity. The Fire Serpent General tilted his head in surprise. It had never imagined that this young man with such profound cultivation would actually come to apologize to it. It seemed that he already knew the truth of the matter. The fire snake calmly looked at the silver-haired young man kneeling in front of it. Its heart was filled with complex emotions. Its wife's inner core was inside this young man's body. When it thought of how its wife had been cut open and her inner core forcibly taken, the fire snake's eyes suddenly flashed with a red light. Although it had never taken the initiative to attack humans, it didn't mean that it wasn't angry. The fire snake's anger was completely within Yi Fan's expectations. If it were anyone else, they would be burning with rage. This inner core in my body belongs to your wife. Today, I'm returning it to you. As Yi Fan spoke, he began to mobilize the spiritual energy in his sea of qi. Buzz. Yi Fan's chest began to emit an intense red light. Under the guidance of Yi Fan's spiritual energy, the fire snake's inner core, which was continuously rotating in the shape of an yin-yang fish, gradually stopped chasing after the ice snake's inner core. It began to slowly leave the yin-yang diagram and slowly move upwards along Yi Fan's meridians. As the red light from Yi Fan's chest gradually moved upwards, Yi Fan's head also began to shine with a red light. When the red light reached Yi Fan's chin, Yi Fan opened his mouth. Whoosh! 10,000 rays of red light spurted out from Yi Fan's mouth. Immediately after, a fire snake's inner core the size of a pigeon's egg flew out of Yi Fan's mouth slowly. It was glowing with a red light and was overflowing with colors. When Yi Fan absorbed Sakitu's Naiden into his own body, it was just a ball of fire spirit qi. It was extremely violent and had no physical form, so it was impossible to expel out of his body. However, after the fire snake Naiden entered Yi Fan's body, it was wrapped in spiritual energy by Yi Fan. Naidens were condensed from spiritual energy, and under the nourishment of Yi Fan's tyrannical and pure spiritual energy, as well as the nourishment of Yi Fan's blood essence, the fire snake Naiden began to gradually regain its physical form. Not only did its spiritual energy increase, but its violent temper also lessened. Yi Fan circulated it with the fire snake's ice Naiden using the Taiji yin-yang diagram. There was yang and yin and yang. They complemented each other, and the yin and yang were in harmony. Naturally, the violent aura of the fire snake's Naiden was neutralized by the Taiji yin-yang diagram. It was his wife's Naiden. As soon as the dazzling Naiden appeared, the fire snake's eyes immediately widened. It had been 15 years. His beloved wife had left him for 15 whole years. Tears welled up in the fire snake's eyes. After the Naiden left Yi Fan's body, it instantly turned into a red light and charged directly at the fire snake. The moment it left Yi Fan's sea of qi, it sensed the presence of a male fire snake. Although it wasn't the female fire snake's soul, it was the essence of the female fire snake's spiritual energy. It couldn't be more familiar with the aura of the male fire snake. Whoosh! The fire snake's Naiden stopped in front of the male fire snake. Then it circled around the male fire snake, shining brilliantly. After circling around the male fire snake 3 times, the Naiden hovered in front of the male fire snake. The male fire snake's eyes were filled with tenderness, and tears welled up in them. It gently moved its head closer to the Naiden hovering in front of it. Then, it used its forehead to gently touch the Naiden. Looking at the Naiden reminded it of its wife. This Naiden allowed it to once again feel the aura of its wife. Yi Fan, who was kneeling on one knee, was deeply moved by the scene in front of him. He slowly took off the white jade mask on his face. His eyes were red. I've returned the Naiden to you. Now, it's time to return the favor. As Yi Fan spoke, he stretched out his hand and pulled out the snake shadow sword that was coiled around his waist. The teary-eyed fire snake raised its head and looked at Yi Fan with a hint of surprise in its eyes. Whoosh! With a flick of his wrist, Yi Fan held the treasured sword upside down. Then he directly pierced the snake's shadow sword towards his left arm. Buzz! The snake's shadow sword, which was brimming with cold energy, instantly sensed Yi Fan's intention to harm himself. When the tip of the sword was less than 3 inches away from Yi Fan's left arm, it suddenly stopped. Buzz! The snake's shadow sword's body trembled and emitted a crisp sound. It was preventing Yi Fan from harming itself. Yi Fan frowned and immediately exerted strength in his hand. Although the snake's shadow sword was full of spiritual energy, it was still sealed. At this moment, its strength was unable to stop Yi Fan. Pooh! Blood splattered everywhere. The incomparably sharp snake shadow sword instantly pierced through Yi Fan's left arm and came out through the bone. His pure white robe was immediately dyed the color of blood. Buzz! The snake's shadow sword that had pierced through Yi Fan's left arm let out a whimper. Then, it automatically pulled itself out of Yi Fan's left arm. At the same time, it began to emit cold energy. The snake's shadow sword was protecting its master. Although it couldn't prevent Yi Fan from harming itself, it could use its cold energy to seal Yi Fan's wound in ice. This would stop the bleeding. Crack! As the snake's shadow sword was gradually pulled out, Yi Fan's left arm was instantly covered in a thin layer of ice. Chapter 448. When the snake's shadow sword pierced the fire snake's body, the wound didn't immediately heal. It wasn't because the fire snake's cultivation wasn't enough, but because the snake's shadow sword was the nemesis of the fire snake. The biting cold air directly entered the fire snake's wound, which directly caused the wound to not completely heal in a short period of time. It could only let the wound naturally form a scab. Although the fire snake's wound looked fine on the surface, Yi Fan knew that the depths of the fire snake's wound still hadn't healed. Since the fire snake's wound was like this, then his own wound should also be like this. This was only fair. In fact, even if the snake's shadow sword didn't use the cold air to stop Yi Fan's bleeding, the pure spiritual energy in Yi Fan's body would automatically heal the wound. It was just that Yi Fan used his mind to stop the spiritual energy in his arm's meridians, so the wound would still continue to bleed. Buzz! The snake's shadow sword trembled and hummed incessantly. "It's okay, I won't die," Yi Fan said to the snake's shadow sword as he put it back on his waist. Drip! 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 Blood flowed out of his left arm and dripped down from Yi Fan's fingers onto the desert, and the yellow sand under his feet began to turn dark red. The fire snake calmly looked at everything in front of it, and the anger in its eyes began to gradually dissipate. It didn't think that the silver-haired young man in front of it would do such a thing. Rustle, rustle, rustle. Yi Fan stood up, stepped on the yellow sand, and walked step by step towards the fire snake. The blood dripping down from his arm drew a line of blood in the yellow sand under his feet. The fire snake didn't move and calmly looked at Yi Fan walking towards it. Yi Fan arrived in front of the fire snake, squatted down, and put his palm on the wound on the fire snake's tail. He wanted to heal the fire snake. Buzz! As Yi Fan mobilized the spiritual energy in his body, a large ball of gentle white light suddenly gushed out from the center of his palm. First, he absorbed the remaining cold energy from the snake's shadow sword into his own body. Then, he continuously injected his spirit energy into the fire snake's wound. The surging white light illuminated Yi Fan's determined face, as well as Fire Snake's astonished eyes. Whoosh! Under the nourishment of Yi Fan's pure spiritual energy, the Fire Snake's wound healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the blink of an eye, the Fire Snake's wounds were healed. "I've paid back everything I owed you." Yi Fan slowly stood up and looked at Fire Snake. "We're even now." After that, Yi Fan turned around and prepared to leave. The Fire Snake's hissing came from behind. It was obvious that it was calling out to Yi Fan. Yi Fan, who was constantly bleeding, turned around and calmly looked at Fire Snake. Buzz. The Dragon Ball above Fire Snake's head suddenly glowed with a red light and kept rotating. Buzz. A slender red beam of light shot out from the Dragon Ball and went straight for Yi Fan. If it was any other time, Yi Fan would have opened his spiritual energy barrier and quickly dodged. But this time, Yi Fan didn't do anything. He just quietly closed his eyes. The Fire Snake probably felt that it wasn't enough and wanted to make another move. However, things didn't happen as Yi Fan imagined. He didn't feel any pain. Instead, he felt that the pain from the wound on his left arm was gradually disappearing. Yi Fan immediately opened his eyes. After opening his eyes, Yi Fan immediately frowned. There was a red light on his left arm. Buzz. The Fire Snake's red beam of light shot directly at the wound on his left arm. His wound was quickly healing. It was healing him. Yi Fan's heart skipped a beat. He raised his head and looked at the Fire Snake with a shocked expression. Whoosh! As the wound on Yi Fan's left arm gradually healed, the Fire Snake withdrew the red light from the Dragon Ball and calmly looked at Yi Fan. Its eyes were clear, and there was no longer any anger. Yi Fan wanted to say something, but he didn't know what to say. The Fire Snake repaid evil with good. This made Yi Fan feel inferior. Hiss! Hiss! The Fire Snake hissed twice at Yi Fan. Then it turned around and slithered toward the Fire Dragon Temple. While slithering, it kept looking back at Yi Fan. Yi Fan understood the Fire Snake's meaning. It wanted him to follow it. Yi Fan stepped forward and followed the Fire Snake into the Fire Dragon Temple with a puzzled expression. One man and one snake, one after the other, entered the main hall. Inside the main hall, there were intricately carved walls and beams. It was grand yet elegant, simple yet dignified. In the center of the main hall, a bronze platform with auspicious clouds came into view. The bronze platform had an antique flavor. It was gilded with flowing clouds, flames, auspicious clouds, and auspicious beasts engraved on it. It was obvious that it was from the previous dynasty. On top of the platform, there was a bronze statue that was more than 10 feet tall. The bronze statue had a dragon head and a human body. It wore immortal robes and held a jade tablet in its hand. It had a sage-like demeanor. 5 feet above the bronze statue, there was a golden canopy that was more than 10 feet tall. It was embroidered with colorful, auspicious clouds. It was extremely beautiful. Right below the bronze statue, there was a large bronze altar table in front of it. On top of it, there was an extremely exquisite gilded tablet with the words Fire Spirit, True Lord, written in ancient gilded seal script. The ancient seal script was written with vigorous strokes and flowed naturally. It was obvious that it was written by a master. This Fire Dragon Temple was really imposing. Buffon, as expected of a temple of immortals. Yi Fan looked around and exclaimed in his heart. Almost every item here was hundreds of years old. Each of them was a rare treasure from the previous dynasty. Any one of them was worth thousands of gold. Chapter 449. The Fire Snake stopped in front of the statue of the true Lord of Fire Dragon. It turned its head to look at Yi Fan, who was standing behind it. Then it turned back to look at the huge incense tube on the altar. It was indicating that it should offer incense to the true Lord of Fire Dragon. Yi Fan thought to himself. Yi Fan took a look at the Fire Snake, then at the statue of the true Lord of Fire Dragon. Then he slowly walked in front of the statue of the true Lord of Fire Dragon and took out 3 incense sticks from the golden incense tube. After lighting the incense sticks with the flames of the thick red candles, Yi Fan respectfully bowed 3 times to the true Lord of Fire Dragon. Then he held the incense sticks in his hand and silently communicated with the true Lord of Fire Dragon. Disciple Yi Fan is here to find the whereabouts of the divine cauldron in order to save my beloved wife. Yi Fan closed his eyes and placed the 3 incense sticks between his eyebrows. He silently prayed to the true Lord of Fire Dragon in his heart. Due to my stupidity, I accidentally hurt the true Lord of Fire Dragon. Please forgive me. After sincerely praying, Yi Fan placed the 3 incense sticks in the purple copper incense burner. Then, he kowtowed 3 times to the statue of the true Lord of Fire Dragon on the prayer mat. Since he had hurt the descendant of the true Lord of Fire Dragon, he had to report it to the true Lord of Fire Dragon and apologize. After doing all this, Yi Fan stood up. Whoosh! The moment Yi Fan stood up, the 3 incense sticks in the incense burner began to burn at a speed visible to the naked eye. Bang! The 1-foot-tall incense sticks burned faster and faster. In the end, there was even a flame. When the fire snake saw this, it immediately lowered its head and respectfully bowed. Buzz! Just as Yi Fan was puzzled, the true Lord of Fire Dragon under the canopy suddenly shone with a dazzling golden light. Whoosh! In the blink of an eye, a huge golden ball of light appeared in front of Yi Fan and spun nonstop. The golden ball of light was about 3 meters in size. It shone with golden light and thousands of auspicious auras. The entire hall was instantly filled with an intoxicating fragrance. Whoosh! Yi Fan's loose white robes fluttered in the wind as the golden orb spun. Whoosh! The spinning speed of the golden ball of light became slower and slower until it finally came to a stop. Bang! The golden light scattered in all directions, and the golden light ball instantly turned into countless specks of golden light, sparkling and sparkling as they dispersed. Amidst the fragments of light, a middle-aged man with the demeanor of a transcendent being stood there with a smile. This person was wearing a soaring dragon crown on his head, a fiery red 9-dragon robe, a coiled dragon-inlaid jade belt around his waist, and a pair of cloud-stepping dragon shoes on his feet. His hair was as black as ink, and his teeth were like jade. His eyes were like stars, and his eyebrows were like swords. What a true immortal! Yi Fan sighed in his heart. He didn't even need to guess to know who the person in front of him was. Flying dragon crown, 9 dragons robe, coiled dragon jade belt, hornless dragon immortal shoes. From top to bottom, he was surrounded by auspicious air and surrounded by dragons. Who else could it be other than the true Lord of Fire Dragon? In fact, the moment the golden ball of light appeared, Yi Fan had already sensed a strong aura that was extremely masculine and domineering. Although his cultivation level was high and his spiritual energy was astonishing, this domineering aura still pressured him to the point that his breathing became a little rushed. Yi Fan understood that the reason why he had such a reaction was not because his cultivation level was not high enough, but because this was an innate reaction that everyone was born with. The majestic aura emitted by the golden light ball made people feel a kind of power that was not angry. That power was like an emperor, and no one could resist it. This was not the first time that Yi Fan felt this aura. Back then, when the white-robed dragon and Brother Kim made a bet in the ancestral house, the white-robed dragon summoned the water dragon, Shui Yuan, and gave the secret treasure, the Thunderfire Pearl, to Shui Yuan. After swallowing the Thunderfire Pearl, the water dragon instantly turned into a purple divine dragon that ruled the world. The majestic aura, just now, was almost the same as the feeling that the purple divine dragon gave him at that time. The dragon was the longest among hundreds of scales and the head of all living things. It was naturally majestic, and the dragon's aura was vast and mighty. It was normal for people to feel intimidated. No matter how high Yi Fan's cultivation level was, he was only one person and had yet to reach the immortal realm. The one who appeared in front of him was a true immortal from the upper realm, true monarch fire dragon. The dragon's aura that he released was even more supreme, so it was reasonable for Yi Fan to feel this way. Junior Yi Fan greets the true monarch. Seeing true monarch fire dragon appear, Yi Fan immediately knelt on the ground. When Fire Snake saw the true body of the immortal ancestor, he immediately nodded his head and bowed to the true monarch. Ha ha! True monarch fire dragon, who was wearing a red robe with 9 dragons, saw Yi Fan kneel to him and immediately laughed loudly. I didn't expect that the famous Eldritch would bow to me. I'm really flattered. Quickly get up, quickly get up. Thank you, true monarch. As Yi Fan spoke, he stood up and respectfully stood with his hands by his side. You get up too. true monarch fire dragon said to Fire Snake, who was prostrating on the ground. Chapter 450. 300 years ago, your cultivation was heaven-defying. You fought 6 immortals alone. That was an eye-opener for me. Perfected Lord Fire Dragon smiled at Yi Fan. Your proud moon heavenly scripture is indeed powerful. It was able to withstand the attacks of 6 immortals. Since ancient times, no one else has been able to do that other than you. It can be said that no one has ever done it before, and no one will ever do it again. Yi Fan smiled awkwardly and did not reply. As far as he knew, he was both righteous and evil in his previous life. In the end, he lost his cultivation and self-destructed. It was not something to be proud of. I already know everything about you. Perfected Lord Fire Dragon looked at the silver-haired Yi Fan and smiled. Everything was fated in your previous life. You don't have to be too upset. Perfected Lord. Yi Fan heard Perfected Lord Fire Dragon's words and knelt on the ground again. Yi Fan pleads for Perfected Lord to give me some guidance and save my wife. The Perfected Lord Fire Dragon, standing in front of him, was a true perfected immortal from the upper realm. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Naturally, he would not let it go. You already know what you should know. You also know what you shouldn't know. Perfected Lord Fire Dragon said as he helped Yi Fan up. What you should do now, didn't Qingqinzi already tell you? But with my current strength, I can't do it. Yi Fan frowned and said to Perfected Lord Fire Dragon. He did not directly mention the power of immortals. After all, Fire Snake was still by his side. He could not reveal the secrets of heaven. Everything is fated. You can't force it. Perfected Lord Fire Dragon said to Yi Fan. If you force it, it will only backfire. I can only tell you this much. Yi Fan furrowed his brows and nodded. Perfected Lord Fire Dragon was a member of the Heavenly Court. Naturally, he had to abide by the rules of the Heavenly Court. He could not say anything without permission. Otherwise, the consequences would be severe. Yi Fan firmly believed this. Qingqinzi had only said a few words to him, and the result was that his immortal record was stripped. One could imagine how strict the heavenly rules were. When I was in the lower realm, someone asked me to pass something to you, True Monarch Fire Dragon said as he waved his sleeves in the air. A 5-inch-long object that shone with silver light instantly appeared in the air. This is... Yi Fan looked at the thing floating in front of him, his eyes shining with a strange light. The object in front of him was 5 inches long and 2 inches wide. It was engraved with double-sided Taotai patterns, and its entire body was silvery white in color. It was wrapped in propitious qi, and it was overflowing with light. For some reason, Yi Fan felt like he had seen this thing somewhere before, as if he had seen it before. This is one of the 9 scabbards of your Frost Dragon sword, Taotai. True Monarch Fire Dragon smiled at Yi Fan and said, Now, it has finally returned to its rightful owner. 9 sheaths. It was Taotai, one of the 9 scabbards. After Yi Fan heard True Monarch Fire Dragon's words, he was overjoyed. No wonder he felt like he had seen this object before. Now, he understood that the material of the Taotai scabbards was exactly the same as the material of the snake shadow sword at his waist. Before Brother Kim imparted the spiritual energy to him, he had told him about the 9 scabbards of the Frost Dragon sword. According to Brother Kim, the Frost Dragon sword was completely different from other divine weapons. The hilt of the Frost Dragon sword was in the shape of a silver dragon, while the scabbards were divided into 9 sections. They were in the shape of the 9 sons of the true dragon, taking the meaning of the 9 sons, suppressing the true dragon. Only the 9 sections of the scabbards could completely envelop the supreme, cold qi emitted by the Frost Dragon sword. As the saying goes, a dragon has 9 sons, but each son is different. The 9 sons are Xionyou, Yazi, Chaofeng, Paleo, Swanee, Taotai, Swanee, and Chiwen. Xionyou loved music, and his shape could be seen on musical instruments. Yazi loved to kill, and his weapons were often engraved with his patterns. Chaofeng loved to take risks, and he had the merit of deterring demons and avoiding disasters. Puleo phone loved to ring, and his voice was as loud as a bell, reverberating through the clouds. Swanee loved to smoke, and it liked to sit. It liked to be quiet and did not like to move. It was one of the ferocious beasts, and it was often seen on incense burners. Tautai was a gluttonous beast with a fierce temperament, and its patterns were often seen on utensils. Swanee was one of the divine beasts. It was shaped like a tiger, and it liked to fight evil. It could distinguish between right and wrong, and it had the power to suppress evil and exorcise demons. Swanee was also known as Basha. It was shaped like a tortoise, and it liked to carry heavy loads. One of the divine beasts. Chiwon was the 9th son of the dragon. It liked to eat, and it especially liked to swallow fire. It was often engraved on the roof to suppress fire. Yifan took the Tautai scabbards that were floating in front of him with both hands. Buzz. The moment the scabbards entered his hands, they shone brightly, and silver light shot out in all directions. Buzz. At this moment, the frost dragon sword that had been coiled around Yifan's waist all this time flew out by itself. It had already sensed the aura of the Tautai. The frost dragon was the father, and the Tautai was the son. When father and son met, they were naturally excited. Buzz. After the frost dragon's sword flew out of Yifan's waist, it shone brightly and flew toward the Tautai scabbards. Buzz. The Tautai scabbards also sensed the aura of the frost dragon sword, and it flew toward the frost dragon sword. The two balls of silver light met in an instant. Clang! Silver light exploded, and propitious chi rose. The frost dragon sword and the Tautai scabbards merged into one. After the silver light dispersed, the frost dragon sword slowly flew back into Yifan's hands. Yifan looked at the divine weapon in his hands again. The Tautai scabbards were the end of the scabbards, and it had already covered the tip of the frost dragon sword. To Yifan's surprise, the silver snake's tail that was coiled around the sword hilt had undergone a huge change. It was no longer a smooth and slender snake's tail. Instead, it had turned into a dragon's tail that was covered in dragon scales and surrounded by auspicious air. Chapter 451. Although the frost dragon sword has been forcefully sealed, its intelligence is not affected at all. True Lord Fire Dragon looked at the surprised Yifan and smiled. Now that the Tautai has returned to its body and the father and son have reunited, the frost dragon has obtained the power of the Tautai. Naturally, a portion of the seal will be broken. If the 9 scabbards return, the seal on the frost dragon sword will be completely broken. At that time, you will truly experience the true power of the frost dragon sword. Yifan was overjoyed when he heard true Lord Fire Dragon's words. Although he only had one of the frost dragon 9 scabbards, he had heard from his brother Kim that the frost dragon 9 scabbards were extremely powerful. Once all 9 scabbards were gathered, their power would not be inferior to the frost dragon sword. Now that he had Tautai, his chances of winning would greatly increase if he faced an expert in the future. Although he did not know the power of the Tautai sword scabbards, the fact that the scabbards could unseal the frost dragon sword meant that the power of Tautai was not to be underestimated. May I know who asked you to bring this treasure to me? Yifan asked true Lord Fire Dragon. Just now, true Monarch Fire Dragon said that he was entrusted by someone. He was very curious about who that person was. Someone who could ask true Lord Fire Dragon to do this was definitely not an ordinary person. Haha, who else could it be? True Lord Fire Dragon laughed. Speaking of which, you know this person too. He is the heavenly dragon that your Yi family has worshipped for generations, old by the Thunder Tribe. It's the heavenly dragon in white. Yi Fan was enlightened. Old by holds an important position in the Thunder Tribe. Recently, he has been dealing with some troublesome matters and has no time to spare. When he found out that I was in the lower realm, he specially asked me to pass this item to you. True Lord Fire Dragon said with a smile. Thank you, True Lord. Yi Fan bowed to True Lord Fire Dragon. When you return to the heavenly court, if you see my benefactor again, please thank him on my behalf. Old Bai told me that you are very courteous. Seeing you today It seems that you are right, true Lord Fire Dragon said with a smile. Don't worry, I will pass on your message. Yi Fan thanked him again. Old White's task has been completed. It's your turn now, true Monarch Fire Dragon said as he turned his head towards Fire Snake. The smile on his face had disappeared, replaced by a dignified expression. After hearing true Monarch Fire Dragon's words, Fire Snake lowered its head even more. Yi Fan frowned when he heard that. He turned his head to look at the crestfallen Fire Snake beside him, then turned his head to look at true Monarch Fire Dragon, who was imposing without being angry. He silently took a few steps back and did not say a word. Although he didn't know what wrong Fire Snake had done, it was still his family's business, and it wasn't convenient for him to get involved. What? Do you still know your mistake? True Monarch Fire Dragon asked coldly when he saw Fire Snake lowering his head. Hiss! The Fire Snake let out a soft hiss, not daring to raise its head to look at true Lord Fire Dragon. What did I tell you before I ascended? True Monarch Fire Dragon looked coldly at Fire Snake and asked. Fire Snake remained motionless and didn't say a word. I told the two of you to cultivate diligently and protect the people. I told you to accumulate merits and bring benefits to all living things in the hope of returning to the righteous path. What did you do? Did you do it? True Monarch Fire Dragon's voice wasn't loud, but it was dignified. Yi Fan, who was standing to the side, could tell that the two of you true Monarch Fire Dragon was referring to was Fire Snake and his wife. Hiss! Hiss! Fire Snake let out a few soft hiss. That's your reason? True Monarch Fire Dragon asked. Fire Snake once again remained silent. Birth, old age, sickness, and death are part of the cycle of all living things. Although Siennaire was harmed, this is also part of her destiny, true Monarch Fire Dragon said to Fire Snake. You've been stubborn for 15 years, and your love has turned into hatred. You abandoned the lives of the people and still have the nerve to come here and see me. Fire Snake bent his head and lightly touched the ground. He nodded 3 times, as if he was kowtowing to true Monarch Fire Dragon an apology. You swore an oath. If you break your promise, you will be severely punished, true Monarch Fire Dragon said to Fire Snake with a solemn expression. Do you have anything to say today? Fire Snake lowered his head and shook it. Chapter 452. The Fire Snake lowered its head and remained motionless, allowing true Lord Fire Dragon to punish it. True Lord, please wait. Yi Fan could not stand it any longer. Even if the Fire Snake had broken its oath, it should not have received such a heavy punishment. To the Fire Snake, 500 years of cultivation was equivalent to taking away half of its life. As Yi Fan spoke, he used his peerless movement technique, and a shadow instantly appeared in front of the Fire Snake. Smack! Yi Fan blocked with his arms and caught true Lord Fire Dragon's palm that was about to hit the Fire Snake. Boom! A loud sound was heard, and the air waves scattered in all directions. Yi Fan, who was blocking in front of the Fire Snake, only felt an earth-shattering force coming from his arms. Before he could use his spiritual energy to resist, his body flew backward like a kite with a broken string. Whoosh! The Fire Snake behind Yi Fan was instantly hit by Yi Fan's flying figure, and it was also sent flying backward. The two of them were directly blasted out of the main hall by true Lord Fire Dragon's palm. Bang! Bang! The man and the snake instantly crashed into the outer wall of the Fire Dragon Temple, which was 10 feet away, and then slid down the wall to the ground. 2 huge cracks appeared on the wall of the temple, made of huge stones, in an instant. True Lord Fire Dragon's palm made Yi Fan's blood and chi churn in his chest, and he saw stars. As he slowly got up from the ground, he used his spiritual energy to calm the churning blood and chi in his chest. As expected of a true immortal from the upper realm, just a casual palm had such shocking power. The power of a true immortal was indeed powerful. Even with his spiritual energy protecting his body, this was still the case. If this palm had hit the Fire Snake directly, the Fire Snake would not have been able to survive for long, even if it did not die. Thinking of this, Yi Fan bent down and checked the injuries of the fire snake lying beside him. At this moment, the fire snake was slowly getting up from the ground, constantly shaking its head. Although Yi Fan had taken most of the force of the palm, the impact of Yi Fan's flying body still made it dizzy. After all, its body was only 10 feet long, and when True Lord Fire Dragon's palm hit it, it did not use its spiritual energy to resist. Seeing that the fire snake was not seriously injured, Yi Fan's anxious heart finally calmed down. Whoosh! True Lord Fire Dragon's figure instantly appeared in front of Yi Fan. True Lord Fire Snake, with its hands behind its back, its brows furrowed, as it calmly asked Yi Fan, "Why did you save it?" The appearance of True Monarch Fire Dragon made the fire snake, who had just lifted its head, lower its head again. True Lord, True Lord. Yi Fan fell to his knees in front of True Lord Fire Dragon, cupped his fists, and said with his head lowered, "Although it was wrong, it did not deserve to die. I hope True Lord Fire Dragon will not be angry and spare it this time." "Spare it," True Lord Fire Dragon said as it turned its head to look at the fire snake. For 15 years, its love turned into hatred, and it did not care about the people of this area. This led to the birth of evil creatures in this desert, and the people suffered. "How can I spare it?" "True Lord, please don't be angry," Yi Fan pleaded with the True Lord of Fire Dragon. As the saying goes, a Taoist is not a saint. Everyone makes mistakes. 15 years ago, his partner was killed by someone else. His love turned into hatred, and he no longer had any hope for humans. I think it's understandable. I hope that True Lord will spare his life on account of his infatuation and mercy and not kill him. Let him repent and repent for his sins, Yi Fan said as he turned his head to look at the fire snake beside him. True Lord Fire Dragon frowned and looked straight at Yi Fan, as if he was hesitating. "If True Lord Fire Dragon really can't spare it, then please punish me as well," Yi Fan said when he saw True Lord Fire Dragon hesitate. "Punish you?" True Lord Fire Dragon asked Yi Fan with a frown. "Why should I punish you?" True Lord's eyes are as sharp as lightning. What this disciple has done will definitely not escape True Lord's eyes. Yi Fan said to True Lord Fire Dragon, "Although Brother Fire Snake has broken his oath, he has not done anything that offends the heavens and reason. This disciple has killed more than 100 people and has a heavy sin. Based on this disciple's sin is much greater than Brother Fire Snake's. Since Brother Fire Snake deserves to be punished, this disciple deserves to die. True Lord, am I right?" True Lord Fire Dragon was at a loss for words after hearing Yi Fan's words. What Yi Fan said was right. Although Fire Serpent's love for humans had turned into hatred, he had never committed any crimes of murder. Yi Fan, on the other hand, was different. During the battle at the Zhou residence alone, he had killed as many as 300 people. "Please punish me, True Lord," Yi Fan said as he lowered his head and offered the Frost Dragon sword with both hands. Fire Snake was kind-hearted and did not deserve to die. He had to save him no matter what. True Lord Fire Dragon looked at the white-haired young man in front of him. His sleeves were stained with blood, and he did not speak for a long time. Although this young man was the reincarnation of Eldritch, he was someone who valued friendship and justice. He could clearly distinguish between gratitude and grudges. He already knew what Yi Fan had done to Fire Snake, returning the inner core, healing the wound, stabbing the arm, and asking for forgiveness. This young man had done everything he could. Not only that, when he was punishing Fire Snake, this young man, who had nothing to do with Fire Snake, stepped forward bravely and saved him with his own life. Such a righteous act was rare and commendable. No wonder the Thunder Sect's white-robed heavenly dragon favored this kid so much. This kid was indeed not ordinary. Forget it. After a long time, True Lord Fire Dragon waved his sleeves and said to Yi Fan, "Get up." That Fire Snake. Yi Fan, who was kneeling on the ground, raised his head and looked at True Lord Fire Dragon. "I'll spare him this time." "Get up," True Lord Fire Dragon said to Yi Fan. "Thank you, True Lord." Yi Fan stood up excitedly. Today, on account of Eldritch pleading for you, I'll remember your punishment and spare you this time." True Lord Fire Dragon turned his head and said to Fire Snake, "If there's a next time, I'll remove the dragon pearl on your head and turn you into an ordinary snake." Hiss! Seeing that True Lord Fire Dragon had forgiven him, the Fire Snake immediately kowtowed to True Lord Fire Dragon. "He's your savior. Why aren't you thanking him?" True Lord Fire Dragon reminded the Fire Snake. The Fire Snake kowtowed to Yi Fan again. If it wasn't for Yi Fan's help, its 1,000 years of cultivation would have been destroyed in an instant. It might have even lost its life. Seeing the Fire Snake bow to him, Yi Fan quickly returned the bow. Chapter 453. 2 hours later. Fire Dragon Town, a small tavern. At the entrance of the tavern, Akatsuki, who was dressed in red, anxiously stood at the entrance, anxiously pacing back and forth. Baihu, on the other hand, was using its front paws to hold onto the window, staring out with its pair of clear and bright eyes. It was already late at night, but the woman and the fox were not sleepy at all. They were both waiting for a man they both deeply worried about, Yi Fan. Before Yi Fan left, he had said that he would be back in 2 hours at most. But now, a full 2 hours had passed, and Yi Fan still had not returned. Their intuition told them that something must have happened to Yi Fan. They knew about Yi Fan's peerless movement skill, not to mention the desert, which was more than 500 miles away. Even the East Sea, which was thousands of miles away, would not take more than 2 hours. At this time, Akatsuki was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. She now regretted that she did not go with Yi Fan. Although she did not know why Yi Fan wanted to go to the desert so late at night, she had a hunch in her heart that Yi Fan's trip should be related to the Fire Snake. He went to find the Fire Snake in the middle of the night, most likely to go to the Fire Snake to offer a humble apology. Although she and Yi Fan had not been together for a long time, she was well aware of Yi Fan's character. He abhorred evil as if it were his enemy, had a kind heart, valued friendship and righteousness, and was unruly and unruly. He was refined and courteous, but cruel and merciless. Sometimes he was as passionate as fire, and sometimes he was as cold as ice. These seemingly contradictory characters were vividly displayed in this man. It was obvious that the middle-aged couple's words today had completely overturned Yi Fan's deduction of the Fire Snake. With his personality, he would definitely pay back the misunderstanding and harm he had done to the Fire Snake. Akatsuki was not worried that the Fire Snake would harm Yi Fan. The reason was simple. When the Fire Snake fought with Yi Fan, it did not take the initiative to attack Yi Fan, let alone when Yi Fan came to ask for forgiveness. She was worried that Yi Fan would do something stupid. In other words, she was worried that Yi Fan would hurt her. At this moment, she wished she could grow a pair of wings and fly to Yi Fan's side in an instant to see what had happened to her beloved man. But she had no way to leave, nor could she leave. Before Yi Fan left, he had specifically instructed her to stay here and protect the middle-aged couple. It was a matter of life and death. She could not afford to be careless. Since she had promised Yi Fan to stay here and protect him, she had to fulfill her duty. But then again, even if she could leave this place, she might not be able to find Yi Fan. With her movement technique, it would take her at least 3 hours to get to the center of the desert from here. And this was under the condition that she used all her strength to move. Yi Fan's movement technique was very high. He came and went like the wind. He could appear anywhere in the desert in an instant. As for herself, she could not determine Yi Fan's exact location. This desert was thousands of miles wide. Where could she go to find Yi Fan? She had strength, but could not use it. Akatsuki became more and more anxious as she thought about it. Her pair of beautiful eyes wrinkled together. Could Yi Fan have encountered some trouble on the way? Could he have encountered that evil creature? Could he be in danger? Could he not be a match for that evil creature? Akatsuki began to let her imagination run wild. Humans were all like this. When they didn't know the outcome of the situation, they would think the worst and not the best. Whoosh! Just as Akatsuki was panicking, A familiar sound broke through the air and entered Akatsuki's ears. Whoosh. After a while, a strong gust of wind followed. Whoosh. The strong wind stirred up yellow sand that hit the windows and made a rustling sound. The appearance of these two voices made Yu Hongji, who was extremely anxious, happy. She could not be more familiar with these two sounds. They were the sounds of Yi Fan's return. Yi Fan's movement technique was very fast. The effect of his peerless movement technique was completely different from that of an ordinary expert. When an ordinary expert used their movement technique, they would at most create a gust of wind. Moreover, the sound of the movement technique and the gust of wind were produced at almost the same time. It was difficult to distinguish. However, Yi Fan's movement technique was not that simple. His movement technique was as fast as lightning. Compared to his movement technique, the gust of wind was not even worth mentioning. When Yi Fan carried Akatsuki back to the warship, he had easily pierced through the clouds and chased after lightning. That scene was something that Akatsuki would never forget for the rest of her life. When a movement technique's speed far exceeded the gust of wind, a phenomenon would appear. First, the sound of the movement technique breaking through the air would be heard. Then, the gust of wind created by the movement technique would appear. The faster the movement technique, the longer the interval between these two sounds would be. However, Yi Fan's movement technique was too fast. The gust of wind created was not as simple as that. The strength of the wind was comparable to that of a gust of wind. Back when Fujiwara no Chiko was afflicted with the soul-dissolving technique, Yi Fan, in order to save his beloved wife, cultivated a peerless secret technique and rushed to the Zhou residence alone to save his beloved wife. The gust of wind created by his movement technique directly overturned the entire wedding banquet. However, at that time, Yi Fan's cultivation was only at the first stage of the mysterious sky secret technique. Now, Yi Fan's cultivation was at the second stage of the mysterious sky secret technique. It was 10 times stronger than the first stage. Chapter 454. When the strong wind dissipated, Baihu, who had been clinging to the window, immediately had her eyes lit up. The person standing outside the door was none other than Yi Fan. In fact, the movement just now was deliberately made by Yi Fan. On the way back from the Fire Dragon Temple, he did not use the cloud riding technique. There were 2 reasons. First, when he left, he promised that he would come back in 2 hours. Now, for hours had passed. He did not even need to guess. Akatsuki and Xiao Zhao must be anxiously waiting for him. He must come back as soon as possible. Second, now it was a special time. The people of Fire Dragon Town were all in a state of panic. The 2 evil beings had been cultivating for many years and were good at transformation. If they came to knock on the door with their own appearance, with Akatsuki's cultivation, she might not be able to distinguish them in time. Even if a spiritual barrier could temporarily protect them, who could guarantee that the evil beings would not be like Inchan Daxion, who could feed on spiritual power? Although the probability of these 2 things happening was very small, Yi Fan had to be careful. At that time, Zhou Quan disguised himself as his father to sneak attack him, causing his beloved wife to be affected by the soul-dissolving technique and become strangers to him. Inchan Daxion, who could suck spiritual power, plotted against him behind his back. In the end, the 3 souls of his beloved wife were still in Matsumoto Takeyoshi's soul-gathering evil cauldron. These 2 things forced Yi Fan to develop the good habit of being meticulous and doing things like Zhou Quan. There was one thing that Akatsuki was still in the dark. In order to ensure their safety, Yi Fan had secretly hidden the Everfire sword under the table in the wine hall. When he left, he used the wide white robe he wore as a cover and pressed the Everfire sword under the table. In this way, even if the evil beings took advantage of his absence to sneak attack here and break the spiritual barrier he set up with the power of the Everfire sword, the evil beings would not be able to take advantage of it. As the saying goes, even immortals are afraid of a puff of smoke, let alone demons. In order to allow Akatsuki to recognize his identity, and in order to rush back here as soon as possible, Yi Fan used his spiritual power to push his movement technique to the extreme. Akatsuki was very clear about her own body movements. That evil creature might be able to imitate her appearance, but it would not be able to imitate her body movements. Yi Fan was very confident in his own movement technique. From the Pear Blossom Palace in Miaojiang to the northernmost glacier, which was thousands of miles away, it only took him 2 hours. Other than the true immortals of the upper realm, if he claimed to be the second, no one would dare to claim to be the first. After landing, Yi Fan slowly walked to the entrance of the tavern. Knock, knock, knock. Yi Fan gently knocked on the door a few times. Before knocking on the door, he had already used his super strong 5 senses to instantly investigate everything in the room. He wanted to allow Akatsuki to recognize him. And at the same time, he wanted to verify if the people in the tavern were really Akatsuki and the rest. The reason was very simple. The evil creature could transform into his appearance, but could also transform into their appearance. He had to be very careful, and he could not make a single mistake. After a round of investigation, Yi Fan's heart was at ease. The fragrance on Akatsuki's body, the spiritual power on Baihu, Xiao Zhao's body, and the fire energy emitted by the departing fire sword embedded under the table were all sensed by Yi Fan one by one. It seemed that everything was the same as when he left, except for Akatsuki and Xiao Zhao. Their heartbeats were obviously much faster than when he had just left. Yi Fan could feel that they were very worried about his safety. Creak! Just as Yi Fan finished knocking on the door, the wooden door of the tavern instantly opened from the inside. Akatsuki, dressed in a red robe, stood in front of the door, looking straight at Yi Fan with a pair of beautiful eyes. Her eyes were filled with resentment, but also full of tenderness. At this moment, she really wanted to rush over and protect Yi Fan, because she was too worried about Yi Fan. Yi Fan had only been gone for 4 hours, but to her, these 4 hours were like 2 years. However, in the end, she did not summon up the courage. She was afraid that if she did this, they might not even be able to be partners. I'm sorry, I came back late and made you worry. Yi Fan knew that Akatsuki was worried about him. He did not come back at the agreed time, so he immediately apologized to Akatsuki. According to Japanese etiquette, it was very impolite to miss an appointment. So, Yi Fan apologizing to Akatsuki was understandable. Zeng, seeing that Yi Fan had returned safely, Baihu jumped up from the windowsill and directly into Yi Fan's arms. Patter, patter. Baihu stuck out her pink tongue and intimately licked Yi Fan's cheek. Although she was now Baihu and could not speak, she was more worried about Yi Fan's late return than anyone else. Okay. Yi Fan smiled as he dodged Baihu's tongue. Aren't I back now? Why are you only back now? Akatsuki suppressed the impulse in her heart, pretending to be calm as she pulled Yi Fan, who was standing at the door, into the room. Chapter 455. You're injured. Akatsuki looked at the blood on her hand, and then looked at Yi Fan's right arm that was soaked in blood. She immediately cried out in alarm. Earlier, she had been immersed in the joy of Yi Fan's safe return, so she had not noticed the abnormality of Yi Fan's white robe. Yi Fan's white robe was stained red, and there were 2 symmetrical cuts that were very eye-catching. Akatsuki, who was familiar with all kinds of weapons, could tell with a glance that the 2 cuts on Yi Fan's left arm were caused by a long sword. Furthermore, it was Yi Fan's snake shadow sword. The reason was very simple. The blood on his sleeve had not dried yet, but the blood around the cut had already frozen into ice. The thing that she was most worried about had happened. In order to ask for forgiveness from the fire snake, Yi Fan had used the snake shadow sword to stab his left arm through the bone. Only like this could he be at ease. You fool! Akatsuki looked at the blood-soaked sleeve. Her pair of beautiful eyes flashed with tears, and her voice began to choke with sobs. She would rather stab herself with the sword than let Yi Fan get hurt in the slightest. Once she thought of the scene of Yi Fan stabbing his left arm with the snake shadow sword, Akatsuki's heart felt like it was being stabbed by a knife. She grabbed Yifan's arm and pulled him into the room. Then she forcefully pressed Yifan into a chair. "You don't have to worry. I'm fine." Yifan, who was wearing the white jade mask, said to Akatsuki. Akatsuki did not say anything. She turned around and quickly walked to the kitchen to get some hot water. The moment she turned around, tears fell from Akatsuki's eyes. Yifan's sword did not stab her left arm, but her heart. At this moment, she finally understood why Yifan did not bring her and Xiao Zhao. If the two of them had followed him, Yifan wouldn't have hurt him at all. As for Yifan asking him to stay here to protect the safety of this place, that was just an excuse. Wu. Inside the restaurant, Baihu, who was standing on Yifan's lap, looked up at Yifan with a pained expression. "Silly girl." Yifan stretched out his right hand and stroked Baihu's head. He smiled and said, "Aren't I fine? Take off your clothes." Akatsuki came to Yifan with a basin of hot water. She placed the basin on the table and said coldly to Yifan, Take off my clothes?" Akatsuki's words stunned Yifan. "Take off your clothes now." Akatsuki, whose eyes were red, shouted at Yifan, "I'm fine. You don't have to. You're not going to take it off, right?" Akatsuki interrupted Yifan's explanation. As she spoke, she walked quickly to Yifan and reached out to take off his clothes for Yifan. "No, you are." Yifan's face turned red from Akatsuki's sudden actions. "What are you doing?" Yifan said as he stood up from his seat. "Sit down," Akatsuki said loudly as she pressed Yifan back into the chair. Her tone was completely commanding. Yifan didn't say anything and let Akatsuki take off his clothes. He knew that Akatsuki was angry. Ever since they became partners, this was the first time he saw Akatsuki angry. "Listen to me, I'm really fine," Yifan wanted to explain to her. "Fine? You're bleeding so much and you're still saying you're fine?" Akatsuki quickly took off Yifan's clothes while staring at Yifan's eyes with her beautiful red eyes. Yifan was completely speechless. In the blink of an eye, Yifan's clothes were completely stripped off by Akatsuki. It was really the cycle of the heavens and karma. The naked Yifan couldn't help but shake his head with a bitter smile. When he had ordered clothes for Akatsuki, he had used this kind of commanding tone to make Akatsuki take off her clothes. Now, retribution had come. His clothes had been taken off, and his upper body was completely stripped off. Next time, don't stab your arm. Stab your heart directly. That would be much better, Akatsuki said coldly to Yifan as she soaked her handkerchief in a copper basin. Yifan's heart skipped a beat. Akatsuki had actually guessed the truth. "Then wouldn't I be dead?" Yifan said to Akatsuki with a smile. He knew that Akatsuki was speaking in a fit of anger. Akatsuki glared at Yifan. Then she used the wet handkerchief to wipe off the blood on Yifan's left arm. At this time, Yifan's left arm was blood red. It was covered in blood, and the wound was covered in clots. It was a shocking sight. When Akatsuki carefully wiped away the blood clots that had already formed on Yifan's wound, she was shocked to find that the wound on Yifan's left arm had almost completely healed. The 3-inch-long wound had already turned into a line of blood. This made Akatsuki feel very surprised and puzzled. It was clear that this wound had been healed, and it wasn't done by Yifan. The reason was very simple. There was still a trace of fire aura left on the wound. And this aura was exactly the same as the aura emitted by the fire snake in the desert. "I told you it was fine. You didn't believe me." Seeing Akatsuki in a daze, Yifan said with a smile, "Was it the fire snake that stopped your bleeding?" Akatsuki asked. Chapter 456. It seems like nothing can be hidden from this exceptionally intelligent woman. Akatsuki did not speak, as she silently dipped a handkerchief in hot water and wiped Yifan's bloody arm. When Akatsuki's soft and boneless hands touched Yifan's bare arm, Yifan under the mask immediately wrinkled his brow, and his arm instinctively trembled. Although he had hugged Akatsuki's waist, and had also let Akatsuki pull his arm, but that was a critical moment, and there was a reason for it, and the two of them were separated by clothes. Now his upper body was naked, and Akatsuki was holding his arm with one hand, while the other hand was using a handkerchief dipped in hot water to wipe his body. This scene made him think of his wife, Fujiwara no Chiko. After the big wedding, every time Ifan took a bath, Fujiwara no Chiko would personally wipe his body, and the scene in front of him was very similar to the scene in front of him. Thinking of the endless spring scenery at that time, Ifan suddenly began to feel his mouth and tongue dry. Although his cultivation was high, but after all, he was still a normal man. Being in contact with Akatsuki's skin made him feel a fire burning in his heart. "I'll do it myself." Ifan took a deep breath and pretended to be calm as he said to Akatsuki, "You are injured, and you have lost so much blood. Let me do it." Akatsuki said without raising her head, while her hands continued to wipe Yifan's body. Just a moment ago, she had already seen Yifan's arm tremble, and although she was inexperienced, but she also understood the reason. It was not only Yifan who had a reaction. Akatsuki's heart was also beating faster. At this time, her face was no different from the color of the crystal mask. When she heard that Yifan wanted her to wipe it herself, she instinctively rejected him without even thinking about it. The reason why she didn't look up at Yifan was because she was afraid that Yifan would see the passion in her eyes. Hearing Akatsuki's words, Yifan was helpless. He could only suppress the lust in his heart and allow Akatsuki to gently rub his arm. For some reason, he felt that Akatsuki's hands were getting hotter and hotter, even hotter than the hot water on her handkerchief. He really wanted to extract the cold energy from the snake's shadow sword at his waist or the ice core in his body to calm his lust, but he couldn't do that. Although Akatsuki's cultivation was not as high as his, but she was still a chi circulating expert. She was now tightly holding his arm, and the meridians were on his arm. If he used the cold energy, Akatsuki would definitely know. With her intelligence, she would definitely see through his intentions. At that time, wouldn't he be exposing himself? He also thought of directly pulling his arm back from Akatsuki's hands, but he couldn't do that. After all, she was treating his wound because she cared about him. If he really did that, wouldn't he be letting down her good intentions and be too rude? At this time, Yifan's heart was in torment and pain. He could go anywhere, but he couldn't resolve the awkward situation in front of him. The two of them were silent, each thinking about their own matters. Finally, after the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the remaining blood on Yifan's arm was completely wiped clean by Akatsuki. The two of them let out a long sigh. After wiping, Akatsuki took out a white handkerchief and carefully bandaged Yifan's wound. She even tied a beautiful knot. "Wear my white robe for the time being." As Akatsuki spoke, she took off her white robe and handed it to Yifan. "Wear your clothes after I wash and repair them." This time, Akatsuki wore two sets of clothes. She wore the red robe inside and the white robe outside. After all, they were in the clouds, and the cold wind was bone-piercing. She had to wear more clothes. "Sorry to trouble you," Yifan said as he took the white robe from Akatsuki and put on. Akatsuki was tall, and the Japanese white robe was unusually wide. After putting it on, Yifan didn't feel any sense of restraint. His chest muscles were bare, and his collar was loose. He looked rough and heroic. At first glance, he didn't look any different from a Japanese. Akatsuki looked at Yifan, who was wearing her white robe, and felt a little gratified. Ever since she partnered with Yifan, it had always been Yifan taking care of her. Now, she could also take care of Yifan. She liked this feeling very much. After tidying everything up, Akatsuki poured a cup of tea for Yifan and sat down opposite Yifan. Baihu lay quietly in Yifan's arms, motionless. "Why were you gone for so long this time? What happened?" Akatsuki asked Yifan. She had a feeling that Yifan didn't just go out to apologize. Something else must have happened. Otherwise, he wouldn't have taken so long to come back. "Do you know what the pair of evil creatures that came to Fire Dragon Town to ask for the boy and girl are?" Yifan said as he took off his white jade mask, picked up his teacup, and took a sip. At this time, The middle-aged couple was already sleeping soundly next door. Yifan wasn't worried that they would see his true face. Why? Do you know the origin of that evil creature? Akatsuki asked. Chapter 457. 100 Bones Skeleton. It was the first time that Akatsuki had heard of this name. For thousands of years, countless people and animals have died in this desert. The accumulated resentment has led to the rampant ghosts and monsters here. Yifan said to Akatsuki that 100 Bone Skeleton is one of them. 100 Bone Skeleton, is it a ghost? Akatsuki asked Yifan. It's not as simple as a ghost. Yifan said with a solemn face. The original form of this 100 Bone Skeleton was originally a skeleton in the desert. Because its resentment was not extinguished when it was dying, its ghost did not disperse. It was lonely and had no one to rely on, so it could only linger on the corpse. After a long time, its resentment and soul merged with the skeleton, and it gained intelligence. You mean, this evil thing is a skeleton possessed by a ghost? Akatsuki asked. You're thinking too simply, Yifan said as he looked at Akatsuki. If that's the case, the Taoist priest in Fire Dragon Town who returned to the secular world would have already subdued it. How could it have died tragically in the hands of this evil thing? Then what's going on? Akatsuki asked Yifan in confusion. After the resentment soul merged with the skeleton, it was just the beginning. Yifan continued. After this thing gained intelligence, it would continuously absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, as well as the essence of the sun and the moon. Although this desert is uninhabited with thousands of miles of yellow sand, for this evil thing, it's simply an excellent place for cultivation. An excellent place for cultivation? You mean this desert? Akatsuki's words were filled with surprise. This was the first time she had heard of this. As far as she knew, cultivators would usually choose to cultivate in a secluded environment deep in the mountains and forests where spiritual energy lingered. She had never heard of anyone who would choose a deserted desert filled with yellow sand as a place to cultivate. You mustn't underestimate this desert, Yifan explained to Akatsuki. During the day, the Yangtze here is blazing and unbearably hot. At night, the Yinqi is pure and as cold as water. As for that evil creature, it has Yin soul and Yang bone. It's not an ordinary monster, and the desert's environment provides it with the best place to cultivate. No wonder they call themselves the desert god. Akatsuki suddenly realized. This evil creature is completely different from ordinary demons, Yifan continued. If ordinary demons want to become powerful, they need to cultivate for hundreds of years before they can take human form, remove the hyoid bone in their mouth, and speak human language. And this evil creature itself is transformed from a human, so its intelligence is naturally much higher than other demons. In this way, it can take less than 3 years of cultivation to take human form and harm people everywhere. They usually appear at night and turn into handsome men and beautiful women to seduce and confuse passing merchants. They take the opportunity to absorb their flesh and primordial spirit in order to enhance their own cultivation and try to cultivate into a bone immortal. Bone immortal? Akatsuki frowned after hearing this. These two words made people feel uncomfortable. That's right, bone immortal. Yifan frowned and said, every time this evil creature absorbed a person's flesh and primordial spirit, its own cultivation will increase by a little. When a number of people whose flesh and primordial spirit has been absorbed reaches 100, one of the original white bones will directly turn into a demon bone. When the 100 white bones in the body completely turn into demon bones, it will cultivate into a bone demon, also known as a 100-bone skeleton. If this 100-bone skeleton wants to continue to cultivate into a bone immortal, it must continue to harm people. However, the flesh and primordial spirit needed to cultivate into a bone immortal is no longer the flesh and primordial spirit of ordinary humans, but must be children under the age of 7. Every year, it will devour 5 pairs of children. After 100 years, it will become a bone immortal. Once it becomes a bone immortal, even the immortals from the upper realm can't do anything to it. Could it be that the pair of evil creatures that asked for children from the people of Fire Dragon Town has already cultivated into a 100-bone skeleton? Akatsuki asked in surprise after hearing Yi Fan's words. According to Yi Fan's words, the pair of 100-bone skeletons had killed at least thousands of people. Yi Fan nodded with a solemn face. Could it be that the 100-bone skeletons we saw in the desert were? Yi Fan's words suddenly reminded Akatsuki of the caravan that had died tragically. It was done by the 100-bone skeleton, Yi Fan said with a frown. There were babies in the caravan, so they naturally wouldn't let them go. Unforgivable, Akatsuki said with gritted teeth. There are 2 more days until the deadline given by that evil creature, Yi Fan said calmly and looked at Akatsuki. Before that, I have a very important thing that I need your help with. What's the important thing? Akatsuki asked Yi Fan. What do you need me to do? At dawn tomorrow, bring shopkeeper Du and his wife, and bring all the residents of Fire Dragon Town safely to the Fire Dragon Temple that is 15 kilometers away from here, Yi Fan said. Chapter 458. To tell you the truth, the 100 skeletons were husband and wife when they were alive. After they died, they cultivated in the desert for more than 800 years. The man calls himself Lord Whitebone, while the woman calls herself Lady Whitebone. Both of them have reached the Bone Demon realm, and their cultivation is unfathomable, Yi Fan told Yu Hongji. If the people stay here, I won't have the time to fight them. Your mission is to take the people of the town to the Fire Dragon Temple. The Fire Dragon deity is worshipped there. No matter how bold the 100 skeletons are, they won't dare to cause trouble there. Whitebone gentleman, Madam Whitebone. Akatsuki looked at Yi Fan with her beautiful eyes and asked curiously, why do you suddenly know so much about this matter? Since Akatsuki asked this, Yi Fan didn't hide anything and told Akatsuki everything that happened in the Fire Dragon Temple. The Fire Dragon True Lord was the one who told him about the 100 skeletons. Yi Fan didn't mention anything about the Taotai scabbard and the Divine Cauldron. After all, these were his secrets and had nothing to do with this matter. Fire Dragon True Lord? You saw Fire Dragon True Lord? Akatsuki was surprised by Fire Dragon True Lord's appearance. She didn't expect Yi Fan to see the legendary immortal. True Lord told me that the 100 skeletons will come to town the day after tomorrow to take the 10 pairs of children, Yi Fan said to Akatsuki. So before sunset the day after tomorrow, you have to bring more than 500 families and more than 2,000 people to the Fire Dragon Temple safely. As for the White Bone couple, let me and Fire Snake deal with them. I'll help you, Akatsuki said to Yi Fan. Although she knew that her cultivation wasn't as good as Yi Fan's, she was still an expert. The more people, the better. Yi Fan shook his head. Didn't you say that the Fire Dragon Temple is very safe? Akatsuki asked Yi Fan. Since true Monarch Fire Dragon is guarding that place, I can help you. The Fire Dragon Temple is indeed very safe, but that doesn't mean that there's no need to watch over it, Yi Fan said to Akatsuki. There are at least 2,000 people in the Fire Dragon town. Someone must watch over them and maintain order there. Perfected Lord Fire Dragon was a perfected immortal from the upper realm. You can't expect him to appear and watch over them, right? Besides, you still have to take care of Xiao Zhao. With her with you, I can face the enemy with peace of mind. Wu, Baihu, who was in Yi Fan's arms, looked up at Yi Fan unwillingly. Yi Fan smiled and patted Baihu's head from behind. Then, all right, Akatsuki saw that Yi Fan's words were reasonable and could only agree. Remember, your responsibility is to protect the local people. No matter what happens at night the day after tomorrow, you can't leave on your own. Do you understand? Yi Fan reminded Akatsuki. What about you? Where are you going tomorrow? Akatsuki asked Yi Fan. I'll secretly protect you in the clouds tomorrow, Yi Fan said. The White Bone couple has reached the Bone Demon realm. They have many changes. If they change into the appearance of the local people and blend into the crowd, it'll be hard to guard against them. Akatsuki seemed to have woken up from a dream and suddenly understood. Yi Fan was right. If the evil couple really changed into the appearance of a normal person and blended into the crowd, then used evil magic to torture the people, the consequences would be unimaginable. After all, the caravan in the desert had its flesh, blood, and primordial spirit taken away in an instant. Yi Fan was really too considerate. It's late now. You still have a lot of things to do tomorrow. Rest, Yi Fan said. Akatsuki nodded in response. Yi Fan stood up from his seat and went directly to the bed that the tavern couple had pieced together for them using a wooden table. He lay down with his clothes on. The red-faced Akatsuki blew out the candle and went directly to the other side of the bed, slowly lying down. The two of them stood on the left and right. Baihu, who was lying in the middle, completely separated the two of them. The night was silent. In the middle of the night, Yi Fan, who was lying on the bed, heard the sound of Akatsuki getting out of bed. Although Akatsuki tried her best to be quiet, Yi Fan still heard it clearly. Yi Fan pretended to close his eyes and sleep, pretending that he didn't know anything. There was a difference between men and women. Akatsuki must have woken up at this time to relieve herself. However, after a series of rustling sounds, the sound of washing clothes came from the kitchen in the distance. She was washing his bloody clothes. Yi Fan, who was lying on the bed pretending to sleep, slowly opened his eyes. He saw Akatsuki's concern for him and remembered it in his heart. When Akatsuki discovered that her left arm was injured, she cried. Although Akatsuki tried her best to hide it, it was still discovered by the attentive Yi Fan. A woman crying for a man. No matter how stupid Yi Fan was, he could understand the meaning behind it. When she wiped the blood on his arm, Yi Fan not only felt Akatsuki's hand getting hotter and hotter, but he also heard her heartbeat getting faster and faster. All signs indicated that this woman had fallen for him. However, the falling flowers willingly followed the flowing water, but the flowing water had no intention of loving the falling flowers. Other than Fujiwara no Chiko, he would not fall in love with another woman. Whether it was the Yi family's daughter, Yi Feishue, who had saved his life, or Akatsuki, who was from a famous sect and treated him meticulously, or even Baihu Xiaozhao, who saved him with her life. In his heart, no woman could replace Fujiwara no Chiko's position. Chapter 459. 2 days later. Fire Dragon Town. Night. In Yikong, Mingyu hung high in the vast sea of stars. Under the moonlight, Yi Fan, who was wearing a white robe and a mask, stood there quietly with his hands behind his back. He raised his head and looked at the bright Mingyu in Yikong. Beside him, Fire Snake, who was possessed by red scales and had a dragon ball on its head, was sitting there, staring straight at the entrance of Fire Dragon Town. At this time, Fire Snake had shrunk its body from 1,000 feet to 100 feet. After all, it was now in the center of Fire Dragon Town. If it didn't shrink its body, the roads of Fire Dragon Town wouldn't be able to accommodate its huge dragon-like body. On its forehead, in addition to the dragon ball the size of a fist, Fire Snake's inner core that Yi Fan returned to him was also floating. The inner core was the size of a walnut and slowly circled around the Dragon Ball. If you fight later, try not to use in the town. Think of a way to lure them into the desert. Yi Fan turned his head and said to Fire Snake, "There are no residential houses there, so you can fight freely." Hiss! Fire Snake nodded at Yi Fan. The White Bone couple has a high level of cultivation. Yi Fan continued to say to Fire Snake, "When the two sides fight, they will definitely divide and conquer. If I'm not by your side, you have to be more careful. If you see that the situation is not good, leave first. Don't act rashly." Hiss! Fire Snake hissed softly, but it was unknown whether it agreed or disagreed. Yi Fan's words had a deeper meaning. Fire Snake was originally a pair. Now that the female snake was no longer in this world, the male snake naturally had no worries. He was worried that in the fierce battle later, Fire Snake would disregard everything and fight with his life. He had lost his wife, so he naturally understood how Fire Snake felt at this time. When he lost his wife, the first thing he thought of was to take revenge. The second thing he thought of was to follow his wife after taking revenge. Fire Snake's current situation was almost the same as his back then. Rather than saying that his heart was as still as water, it would be more accurate to say that he was completely disheartened. Under such circumstances, it didn't matter to Fire Snake whether he lived or died. The female snake was already dead. If anything were to happen to the Fire Snake, the spirit seed would disappear from this world. Come to think of it, he was indebted to true Lord Fire Dragon. It was reasonable for him to protect his descendants. He couldn't let anything happen to Fire Snake, be it for public or private reasons. At this thought, Yi Fan turned to look at Fire Snake. Fire Snake's eyes were calm, as if he was thinking about something. "Are you thinking about your wife?" Yi Fan asked Fire Snake. Fire Snake turned his head and glanced at Yi Fan, but didn't say anything. "I'll tell you the truth. Although your wife is no longer alive, it's not impossible to bring her back to life," Yi Fan said calmly to Fire Snake. "This." Fire Snake immediately turned his head after hearing Yi Fan's words. His eyes were filled with shock. "Brother Snake, to be honest, my experience is similar to yours. My wife's soul is also incomplete, and we don't know whether she's dead or alive. I came here from thousands of miles away in order to find an ancient secret technique to save my wife," Yi Fan said to Fire Snake. "This ancient secret technique is extremely exquisite and unparalleled in the world. It contains the technique to return the soul to the body, as well as the method to recreate flesh and blood. If you can obtain this technique, your wife will be able to be reborn and return to life." Yi Fan's words could be said to be half true and half true. He didn't say that he was looking for the 9 cauldrons, nor did he reveal the secrets of the 9 cauldrons to Fire Snake. He only said that he was looking for a secret technique. The secret technique recorded in the 9 cauldrons could indeed return the soul to the body, but he didn't know whether it could recreate flesh and blood and be reborn. Since Fire Snake was disheartened by the loss of his wife, then he would give him a chance to live. Whether or not the 9 cauldron secret technique contained such a secret technique, at least Fire Snake would have some hope and the courage to live. Return the soul to the body, recreate flesh and blood, be reborn from the body, return to life. Yi Fan's words caused Fire Snake's eyes to light up, even though his heart was already dead. If what this person said was true, then wouldn't his wife have a chance to be reborn? However, in just a moment, Fire Snake's eyes dimmed again. He shook his head and slowly turned his head away. How could there be such a secret technique in the world? If there really was such a mysterious technique, true Lord Fire Dragon would have told him long ago. One must know that true Lord Fire Dragon was a true immortal of the Heaven Realm and his ancestor. There was no reason for him not to help him. What? You don't believe me? Yi Fan saw Fire Snake shake his head and guess what Fire Snake was thinking. Fire Snake didn't say anything. "Not everything can be helped by immortals," Yi Fan said to Fire Snake. "If they can help, then how could your wife die? How could my wife's soul be incomplete? You should know better than me how strict the rules of the Heaven Realm are." He told the Fire Serpent what Qin Qinzi had told him. Chapter 460. This young man's words were not without reason. From what true Monarch Fire Dragon had said to this young man, there was also an immortal with the surname Bai in the heavenly realm. His relationship with this young man was definitely not ordinary. Otherwise, he would not have given the Taotai scabbard to him. Could it be that the secret technique this young man was talking about was true? Fire Snake stared at Yi Fan with its fiery eyes. It did not know if Yi Fan was telling the truth. "You've stayed in the desert for so many years. I'm sure you know." Yi Fan looked at the Fire Serpent and said, "There's a treasure in the desert. I'll come here for it. Without it, I will not be able to obtain the secret technique." Before coming here, Onijiro had told him that Fire Snake seemed to be guarding something. If that was the case, then this Fire Snake would definitely know the exact location of the Divine Cauldron. As Yi Fan said this, his eyes were fixed on Fire Snake. He wanted to see how Fire Snake would react. Whoosh! Just as Yi Fan was observing the reaction of the fire serpent, a violent gust of wind, mixed with the yellow sand that filled the sky, instantly rose from the desert in the distance, forming a huge sand wall that was more than a dozen miles wide and several hundred feet tall. It whistled as if it was covering the sky and covering the earth as it rushed towards them. Its momentum was so strong that the wind and clouds changed color. "It's coming." Yi Fan and Fire Snake immediately went into battle mode. Whoosh! The sand wall became faster and faster under the urging of the gust of wind. Wherever it passed, the yellow sand would roll back and soar into the sky. This evil creature wanted to use this powerful sand wall to uproot Fire Dragon Town and completely destroy it. What a ruthless move. "Let's go," Yi Fan said to Fire Snake. He activated his movement skill, and his figure flashed. Whoosh! Yi Fan's figure instantly disappeared and reappeared at the entrance of Fire Dragon Town. Yi Fan's movement skill did not surprise Fire Snake. After all, they had already fought before. Tung! Yi Fan's movement technique was fast, but the Fire Snake's movement technique was not slow either. The moment Yi Fan disappeared, the Fire Snake did not show any weakness. It urged the Reiki of the Dragon Ball, and a burst of raging flames suddenly rose around its body, and then disappeared in an instant. Bang! Fire Snake reappeared beside Yi Fan as a large ball of flames rose into the air. Just like that, the man and the snake stood at the entrance of Fiery Dragon Town, looking at the crazy sandstorm that was approaching from afar. Whoosh! The speed of the sandstorm was getting faster and faster, and the height of the sand wall was also getting higher and higher. Looking from afar, the sky was still yellow sand. At this moment, the sandstorm was less than 10 miles away from Fiery Dragon Town. A little closer, a little closer. Yi Fan muttered to himself as he watched the approaching sandstorm. He was looking for the best opportunity to strike back. In the face of such a huge sandstorm wall, his own cold air was of little use. If he wanted to stop such a sandstorm, he could only use his own spirit energy. Using a Reiki wall to fight against the sandstorm wall was Yi Fan's countermeasure. Setting up a Reiki wall 10 miles away was not a problem for the current Yi Fan at all. If it was in the past, he would have already made a move. However, he was no longer the young boy he used to be. Countless battles, big and small, had taught him to be careful. Setting up a Reiki wall 10 miles away and setting up a Reiki wall 1 mile away would consume almost 10 times more Reiki. In a fight between experts, what mattered was the result, not showing off or showing off one's skills. Yi Fan had a deep understanding of this point, and he had also suffered greatly. He had already calculated that when the sandstorm was 300 feet away from him, it would be the best time to make a move. This distance was neither too far nor too close, and he could attack or retreat. After making up his mind, Yi Fan, who was standing with his hands behind his back, secretly condensed Reiki in his palms, waiting for the right time. Whoosh! The earth-shattering sandstorm wall was less than 5 miles away from them. Whoosh! Before the sandstorm wall arrived, the strong wind arrived first. Whoosh! Yi Fan's white robe fluttered in the strong wind brought about by the sandstorm, making flapping noises. The strong wind was mixed with a strong smell of rotting corpses. It was not the first time he had smelled this smell of rotting corpses. When he and Akatsuki had first arrived at Fire Dragon Town, the strange wind they encountered at the entrance emitted this smell. 5 miles, 4 miles, the crazy sandstorm was getting closer and closer. Under the white jade mask, Yi Fan narrowed his eyes and prepared to make a move. However, at this time, the fire snake, which had been entrenched beside Yi Fan all this time, began to move. It slowly moved in front of Yi Fan, blocking Yi Fan behind it. It was very obvious that it wanted to make the first move. The fire snake's action immediately made Yi Fan frown. It immediately disrupted Yi Fan's plan. However, Yi Fan did not say anything about this. After all, they were now working together to deal with the enemy, and there was no agreement on who would make the first move. This situation made Yi Fan feel a little uncomfortable. He had always been a lone wolf, fighting alone. Even if Akatsuki was by his side, she only obeyed his orders. Now the situation had changed. He and the fire snake were equals, and there was no superior or subordinate relationship. In this situation, he could only adapt to the situation and deal with it as it came. Yifan thought to himself, let's see what the fire snake's plan is first. Buzz. The dragon ball floating above the fire snake's head suddenly lit up, and the fire snake's body began to rapidly grow. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.